Hey there, tonight we're diving into the opulent yet precarious world of a Tudor New Year, where the exchange of gifts was less about merriment and more about political maneuvering. What you're about to discover is how these ornate presents could make or break royal alliances. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Under the reign of the Tudors, New Year's wasn't just about a fresh calendar and slightly hungover resolutions. Nope, this was a season drenched in opulence and political chess games, where gifting was less about spreading goodwill and more about asserting dominance and securing alliances. It was the time of year when Henry Roman VIII, the king with a penchant for turning heads and losing wives, would indulge in what can only be described as royal gifting on steroids. Let's start with Henry Roman VIII gift-giving habits, which were about as subtle as a jousting match. The guy wasn't exactly picking up scented candles at the local Bath and Body Works. Oh no, his gifts were extravagant displays of wealth and power, featuring everything from gold cups to finely crafted jewels. In 1532, for example, he gifted Anne Boleyn with a jewel-encrusted clock, an item that screamed both "I adore you" and "look at what I can afford." This wasn't just a nod to romance, it was a declaration of his might, a shiny reminder that he could splurge on the latest in Tudor tech without batting an eyelid. But why all the fuss over presents? Well, in Tudor England, these exchanges were less about holiday cheer and more about political maneuvering. You see, a well-placed gift could secure a powerful alliance or ensure loyalty in a court that often resembled a Game of Thrones episode. It was a way to keep the nobles on their toes and in debt, literally and figuratively. A gift from the king was also a gentle reminder of his power, a gilded chain tying the receiver to the royal court, whether they liked it or not. The economic pressures these gift-giving traditions placed on the nobility were immense. Picture this. You're a noble, and the king has just sent you a golden chalice that probably cost more than your estate. You can't exactly reciprocate with a handmade card. Instead, you're expected to return the favor with something equally lavish, which often meant digging deep into your pockets, or more likely, your tenants' pockets. The financial strain was real, my friends. For many nobles, the new year was less about merrymaking and more about making sure they didn't end up in debtor's prison. Yet, these exchanges were critical in maintaining the delicate balance of power, serving as both a carrot and a stick. A gift could be a sign of favor, a hint that you were in the king's good books. Conversely, the absence of one could suggest you were on the outs, a silent but deadly signal in a world where courtly favor was everything. If you didn't receive a gift, well, you might want to start updating your CV for potential exile. What's fascinating and absurd is how these traditions became a spectacle of wealth, a competition of one-upmanship that could easily ruin a noble family. The myth of the Tudor court as a golden age of chivalry and romance is charming, but peel back the layers, and you'll find a world driven by economic desperation and political survival. The lavish gifts were a facade, hiding the harsh reality of a court rife with intrigue and ambition. While it's tempting to romanticize Henry's court as an endless parade of opulence and charm, the truth is, these traditions reveal much more about the socio-political dynamics of the time. The New Year's gifts were not just tokens of affection. They were tools of statecraft, currency in a complex economy of power where everyone, from the king to the lowliest courtier, was playing the long game. It's a testament to the enduring human tendency to use celebrations as a theater for power plays. As the curtain rises on the Tudor New Year, we see a tableau of glittering gifts and hidden intentions, a world where the wrapping paper might be elaborate, but the message inside was often blunt. Stay loyal, stay useful, or stay out of the way. And as we unwrap these historical presents, we find that the tales they tell are far more intriguing than any myth, revealing a court where every gift was a gamble, and every new year a new round in the Game of Thrones. So, as our Tudor New Year drama unfolds, let's dive into the tangled web of court politics, where gifting was as much a blood sport as hunting. Picture the scene. nobles nervously eyeing each other over a sea of velvet and brocade, each one clutching their carefully chosen offerings, praying they'd hit the jackpot with the king's favor. In this arena, a misstep could be as fatal as a sword thrust, and the stakes were as high as Henry Roman VIII cholesterol levels after a hearty feast. Enter Anne Boleyn, the woman who knew how to play the game like a true Tudor virtuoso. Anne wasn't just about fluttering eyelashes and French allure. She was a political strategist of the highest order. Her gifts to Henry weren't mere trinkets. They were calculated moves on a chessboard where the king was both the prize and the opponent. Let's take her famous New Year's gift in 1532, a delicately embroidered shirt, personally crafted by Anne. Now, before you scoff at the simplicity, consider the subtext. This was no ordinary piece of clothing. It was a whisper of intimacy, a personal touch in a world drowning in gold and jewels. It said, "I'm not just another courtier, I'm your confidante, your partner." And Henry, ever the sucker for a romantic gesture wrapped up in political savvy, was entranced. Anne's strategic gifting was not just about winning Henry's heart. It was about securing her own position in a court that was less about merry festivities and more about maneuvering through a live chess game where everyone was a potential pawn, or worse, a sacrifice. In the Tudor court, a well-placed gift didn't just buy you favor, it could buy you survival. But what if you got it wrong? Well, let's just say you'd be one step closer to a premature retirement in the form of a royal snub or worse, a one-way trip to the Tower. Now, you might be wondering why women like Anne had such a pivotal role in this gift-giving extravaganza. In a male-dominated court, women wielded influence in the spaces where men often couldn't. The art of gifting, with its nuances and subtleties, was one such realm. Women like Anne understood that a gift was not just an object but a message, a silent conversation in a language the court was fluent in. They could leverage these exchanges to sway opinion, forge alliances, and even manipulate the king himself, all without stepping foot onto the battlefield. It was a different kind of power, wielded with a velvet glove, but as potent as any sword. But before we start romanticizing these interactions as some kind of elegant ballet, let's strip away the glittering facade. While the myth of a court alive with chivalrous gestures is alluring, the reality was far grimmer. These exchanges were transactional, often driven by desperation and necessity. For every Anne Boleyn who successfully navigated these treacherous waters, there were countless others who sank beneath the weight of expectation and failure. In a world where the cost of participation was staggering, the pressure to deliver the perfect gift was relentless. Nobles were expected to match or exceed the king's extravagant offerings, and failing to do so could be a fast track to oblivion. Let's talk numbers for a moment. In the early 1500s, a noble could easily spend the equivalent of several years' income on a single New Year's gift. That's right, years. Imagine forking over your annual salary just to keep your head above water in the royal favor pool. And if you think that sounds absurd, remember this was an age when appearances were everything, and being outshone by your peers was not an option. The economic strain was a silent but persistent threat, lurking beneath the surface of every gilded celebration. And speaking of appearances, the Tudor court was a master class in maintaining them. The myth of a merry, united court was just that, a myth. Behind the dazzling displays of wealth and camaraderie lay a world driven by cutthroat ambition and ruthless competition. It was like high school on steroids, where every glance and gesture could be a power play, and the stakes were life-altering. New Year's was less a time for celebration and more a season of strategic warfare, where every gift was a potential weapon, every smile a calculated move. The Tudor court was a place where the line between security and peril was as thin as a silken thread, and the New Year's celebrations were the ultimate test of one's ability to walk that line. It was a world where women like Anne Boleyn could rise through sheer wit and cunning, yet one misstep could lead to a devastating fall. The allure of the court, with its rich tapestries and golden halls, was undeniable, but beneath its gleaming surface lay the harsh reality of survival, where every move could spell triumph or disaster. In the end, the Tudor New Year wasn't about joy or renewal. It was a high-stakes game of politics and power, played out under the guise of gifting and celebration. As we continue to unravel the layers of this intricate dance, we find that the stories hidden within are as complex and compelling as any fictional tale, revealing a court where every gesture was a gamble, and every new year marked another chapter in the relentless pursuit of power. So, stay tuned as we delve even deeper into this tumultuous world, where history unfolds with every twist and turn, and the drama is as rich as the treasures exchanged. As we continue our romp through the glittering, yet gritty world of Tudor New Year festivities, let's dive headfirst into the economics of this spectacle. Because let's be real, behind every golden chalice and jewel-encrusted ornament lies a ledger groaning under the weight of extravagance. It's time to lift the curtain on the financial acrobatics necessary to keep this royal circus running. Picture the scene. A bustling Tudor market square where merchants shout over each other, hawking silks, spices, and curiosities from across the globe. This wasn't just a flea market on steroids. It was the lifeblood of courtly celebrations. The logistics of organizing a Tudor New Year's bash would make planning a modern-day wedding look like child's play. We're talking about a nationwide supply chain that spanned continents, with traders navigating treacherous seas and rickety roads to deliver their goods. It was the Tudor version of Amazon Prime, only with a higher risk of piracy and dysentery. Now, let's talk numbers. Because these shindigs didn't come cheap. A single New Year's feast could cost upward of £100, a sum that might not seem like much until you realize that in today's money, you're looking at about £50, 000. And that's just the menu. Factor in the gifts, the extravagant clothing, the entertainment, and you're flirting with bankruptcy faster than you can say, pass the mead. Lesser nobles were often caught in this economic maelstrom, desperately trying to keep up with the Joneses, or, in their case, the Tudors, while clutching their rapidly emptying purses. So, what did all this opulence buy you, besides a potential trip to debtor's prison? For starters, a menu that read like a culinary tour of the known world. Roasted peacock, anyone? How about a side of swan, complete with feathers for that extra touch of authenticity? Exotic spices like saffron and cinnamon were sprinkled liberally, each pinch a reminder of England's far-reaching trade networks. These ingredients didn't just spice up the dishes. They spiced up England's economy, creating demand for imports that enriched the realm's merchants, if not its nobles. And let's not forget the sheer manpower required to pull off these events. We're talking cooks, servers, musicians, and even jesters, all working round the clock to ensure the festivities went off without a hitch. This was the Tudor gig economy, where stable boys moonlighted as cupbearers and chambermaids doubled as decorators. It was a world where everyone from the butcher to the baker, candlestick makers were optional, had a role to play, each one contributing to the grand illusion of endless wealth and power. Yet, amid the clinking goblets and rustling silks, the economic strain on the lesser nobility was palpable. While the king could afford to splash out on gold and diamonds, others were left to scrape together a semblance of splendor from their modest means. Many nobles found themselves juggling debts, like juggling flaming torches, precariously balancing on the tightrope of financial ruin. But why, you might ask, would anyone willingly subject themselves to such a fiscal headache? Ah, therein lies the rub. In the Tudor court, appearances were everything. A lavish gift or a sumptuous feast wasn't just about keeping up with the royal Joneses. It was about showcasing your loyalty, your importance, and your staying power in a court where forgetting your place could mean losing it altogether. It was social currency, spent as freely as the real thing, but with much higher stakes. Now, let's bust a myth that's as persistent as a moth in a wardrobe full of brocade. The notion that these nobles were simply frivolous spendthrifts. Sure, they had a penchant for the extravagant, but there was method to their monetary madness. In a court where every gesture was scrutinized, and every decision had political implications, the financial outlay was an investment in power and influence. A well-timed gift or a spectacular feast could elevate one's standing, win allies, or even secure a strategic marriage. It was a game of chess, played with gold pieces and human lives. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the romanticized vision of the Tudor court as a realm of endless feasting and merriment. The reality was far grimmer. For every dance and dalliance, there was a backdrop of political intrigue and economic uncertainty. The court was a crucible of ambition, where the sheen of gold masked the tarnish of debt, and the specter of ruin lurked just beyond the torchlight. The logistics of sourcing exotic items for a New Year's celebration alone could rival any modern supply chain dilemma. Consider this. A single shipment of spices might take months to arrive, traveling from the East Indies through treacherous seas and pirate-infested waters. And once it reached English shores, it was a race against time to distribute these precious goods to the nobility, ensuring they arrived in pristine condition. The stakes were high, and the pressure was relentless. Even the labor force behind these events was a testament to the immense effort required. Hundreds of workers, from skilled craftsmen to lowly scullions, toiled tirelessly to transform raw materials into masterpieces fit for a king. And all this while facing the ever-present threat of illness, injury, or simply falling out of favor, a Tudor occupational hazard if there ever was one. Yet, amid the economic strain and logistical challenges, the allure of the Tudor New Year persisted. It was a celebration of excess, a spectacle of power, and a testament to human ambition. Beneath the glittering facade lay a complex web of relationships, where every gesture, every gift, and every feast was a move in the endless game of courtly politics. As we continue our journey through this tumultuous era, we'll delve even deeper into the intricacies of the Tudor court, exploring the forces that shaped its history and the players who defined its legacy. So stay tuned as we unravel the threads of this extraordinary tapestry, revealing a world where history is as vibrant and volatile as the people who lived it. The Tudor court's New Year, a spectacle of opulence and intrigue, was a stage where every glittering gift was a political performance, and each noble was a player vying for the king's favor. As we delve into the symbolism behind these lavish exchanges, we find a world where even the most seemingly trivial object could embody immense power. Let's start with the gifts themselves, shall we? Gift from the king was more than a token of appreciation. It was a message wrapped in gold leaf. Take the ornate tapestries Henry Roman VIII gifted to foreign dignitaries. These weren't just wall hangings. They were intricate narratives woven with threads of diplomacy. Each thread told a story of England's wealth, artistic prowess, and political reach, a visual declaration that England was a force to be reckoned with. Think of it as the Tudor equivalent of a modern-day power flex, only with more embroidery and fewer tweets. Speaking of power plays, let's not forget the infamous Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, where Henry Roman VIII and Francis I of France engaged in a royal showdown disguised as a festival. Amidst the tournaments and feasting, gifts flowed like wine, each one a carefully calculated move on the diplomatic chessboard. Henry presented Francis with a jeweled collar worth a staggering 15,000 crowns, roughly the equivalent of £3 million today. This was less a gift and more a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge wrapped in velvet and encrusted with jewels. It was Henry's way of saying, "Top this," while simultaneously reminding Francis of England's wealth and influence. And in the world of Tudor diplomacy, that was the ultimate checkmate. But let's not romanticize this exchange as a mere act of chivalry. Behind the glittering facade of camaraderie lay a murky pool of political maneuvering. The Field of the Cloth of Gold was less about friendship and more about rivalry, a chance for two monarchs to size each other up while pretending to play nice. It was a reminder that even in the grand theater of diplomacy, appearances were everything, and the stakes were as high as Henry's waistline after a particularly indulgent feast. Now, let's dive into the symbolism behind these gifts, which often carried more weight than the gold they were made of. Take, for instance, the practice of gifting falcons, a favorite among the nobility. A falcon wasn't just a bird. It was a status symbol, a nod to one's prowess in the hunt, and a subtle reminder of the king's authority. Receiving a falcon from the king was akin to receiving a badge of honor, a feathered token of his favor. But woe betide the noble who failed to return the gesture with equal grandeur. In the Tudor court, a mismatched gift was not only a social faux pas, but a political misstep that could cost you dearly. The symbolism didn't stop at birds, though. Books, too, were a popular choice, especially when they came bound in velvet and studded with precious stones. But these weren't just any books. They were carefully selected tomes filled with allegories and moral tales. A king gifting a book was sending a message, often a not-so-subtle suggestion that the recipient might benefit from a particular lesson contained within its pages. It was the Tudor version of a passive-aggressive post-it note, only with more gilding and fewer adhesive strips. Yet, for all the romance of these exchanges, there's a harsh reality lurking beneath. The pressure to reciprocate with equal or greater extravagance was immense, especially for those who could ill afford it. It was a game where the rules were simple: keep up or be left in the dust. The financial strain was no laughing matter, and for many nobles, the cost of participation was ruinous. But in a world where social standing was as volatile as the English weather, the risk was one they had to take. And let's talk about the global implications of these exchanges. Tudor gift-giving had a reach far beyond the confines of the English court. In 1554, Queen Mary I sent her cousin, Emperor Charles V, a jewel-encrusted clerk that was as much a declaration of her loyalty as it was a testament to England's craftsmanship. This wasn't just a pretty timepiece. It was a diplomatic olive branch, a ticking reminder of the alliance between England and the Holy Roman Empire. These gifts were not just gestures of goodwill. They were strategic tools in the art of statecraft. They served to strengthen alliances, cement treaties, and sometimes even avert wars. In a world where a single misstep could lead to conflict, a well-chosen gift was worth its weight in gold, literally and figuratively. It was a delicate dance of give and take, where the wrong gift could spell disaster, and the right one could change the course of history. But let's not sugarcoat it. For all the grandeur and symbolism, these exchanges also highlight the stark inequalities of the time. While the nobility engaged in their gilded game of one-upmanship, the common folk bore the brunt of the economic strain. It was their labor, their taxes, and their sacrifices that fueled the opulence of the court. The myth of a golden age of chivalry and romance is tempting, but the reality was far grimmer, a world where the few lived in luxury on the backs of the many. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Tudor court, it's clear that the new year was more than a time for celebration. It was a high-stakes game of diplomacy and power, where every gift was a calculated move, every gesture a potential gambit. The allure of the court, with its rich tapestries and glittering halls, was undeniable, but beneath its gleaming surface lay a world driven by ambition, intrigue, and survival. So, as we wrap up this chapter of our Tudor tale, remember that behind every jeweled cup and embroidered shirt lies a story of human ambition and the relentless pursuit of power. The Tudor New Year was a theatre of politics, where the drama unfolded in every exchange, and the stakes were as high as the crowns worn by the players. Stay tuned as we delve even deeper into this fascinating world, where history is as rich and complex as the people who lived it. So, here we are at the grand finale of our Tudor extravaganza, a journey through the glittering yet gritty halls of power, diplomacy, and yes, a little bit of good, old-fashioned financial ruin. As we stand on the brink of wrapping up this tale, it's time to reflect on how these Tudor traditions have trickled down to influence our modern perceptions of holiday gift-giving. Spoiler alert, it's more about politics than peace on earth. First, let's tackle the myth of the Tudor New Year as a fairy tale of endless feasts and chivalrous exchanges. Sure, it's nice to picture Henry Roman VIII handing out golden goblets, while Anne Boleyn coyly gifts embroidered shirts, but the reality was a bit more cutthroat. At its core, this was a high-stakes game of social chess where every move could make or break your standing. In today's terms, imagine your boss giving you a Rolex at the office holiday party and expecting a Tesla in return. Well, back in 1530, the stakes were just as absurd, if not more so. The economic context behind these lavish exchanges can't be overstated. The sheer cost of participating in the New Year's gift-giving marathon was enough to bankrupt a lesser noble. Picture spending a year's income, or several, just to keep up appearances. That's like maxing out your credit card for a designer handbag because everyone else at the holiday gala is doing the same. It's a wonder any of these households managed to keep afloat. But then again, survival often meant a bit of creative accounting and a lot of borrowing. Fast forward to today, and you'll see that not much has changed in the politics of gifting. The stakes might not include a one-way ticket to the Tower of London, but the pressure to give and receive remains. Just look at the modern office Secret Santa, where the unspoken rule is to gift just enough to show you care, but not so much that you seem desperate for a raise. It's a delicate dance, one that would make even the most strategic Tudor courtier proud. But why do we continue this tradition of gift-giving, especially when it can be so fraught with tension and expectation? The answer lies in the age-old human desire to build connections, assert status, and of course, outshine the competition. In the Tudor court, a gift was a statement of power, a tangible measure of one's place in the social hierarchy. Today, while the stakes are a tad less life-threatening, the game remains the same. We gift to solidify relationships, to curry favor, and sometimes just to keep up with the Joneses, or the Kardashians, as it were. Now, let's bust another myth, the notion that these exchanges were purely about the joy of giving. The reality is, they were more about the strategic art of receiving. In the Tudor court, a gift was a subtle hint at what was expected in return. It was a transactional exchange, a quid pro quo wrapped in silk and lace. And while we'd like to think we've evolved past such mercenary behavior, the truth is, we're not so different from our Tudor ancestors. Whether it's corporate gifting or familial obligations, the expectation of reciprocity is as alive today as it was in Henry's court. But let's not paint the Tudors as entirely heartless. There was a certain romantic allure to these exchanges, a sense of drama and intrigue that continues to captivate our imaginations. The lavish displays of wealth, the whispered secrets behind closed doors, the daring political gambits, all these elements make for a story that's as compelling as it is cautionary. And it's this blend of myth and reality that keeps us coming back for more, eager to uncover the truths hidden behind the tapestry of history. As we draw parallels between the past and the present, it's clear that while the players and pieces have changed, the game remains largely the same. The politics of gift-giving, with its unspoken rules and hidden agendas, is a dance as old as time. Whether it's a Tudor noble presenting a bejeweled falcon or a modern executive exchanging luxury pens, the underlying motives are strikingly similar. It's about influence, power, and the ever-elusive quest for favor. And so, as we wrap up our tour of Tudor holiday traditions, let's remember that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven with the threads of human ambition, desire, and folly. The Tudor New Year, with all its opulent gifts and political machinations, serves as a mirror reflecting our own world, a world where the art of gifting is still very much alive and fraught with the same complexities as it was centuries ago. In the end, the legacy of the Tudor New Year is one of both romance and reality. It's a tale of glittering facades and gritty truths, a story that reminds us that behind every grand gesture lies a complex web of intentions. As we bid adieu to Henry, Anne, and their merry band of courtiers, let's carry forward the lessons of their time, remembering that while the players may change, the game of power and politics remains eternal. Here's to the Tudors, who taught us that even in the most festive of settings, the stakes can be as high as the castles they called home. The Spartan world didn't roll out the red carpet for its future warriors. It tossed them into a pit of discipline and called it education. Welcome to the Agoge, the ancient Greek boot camp that made modern military training look like summer camp with extra push-ups. Picture this: 7-year-old boys, barely done trading their toy soldiers for real spears, are whisked away from their families into the arms of Sparta's most notorious institution. The Agoge wasn't just the beginning of their military careers. It was a political and economic strategy wrapped in the guise of childhood development. Now, don't let the Hollywood version fool you. The Agoge wasn't just about training pretty boys with chiseled abs to shout, "This is Sparta," before kicking folks into convenient, bottomless pits. Nope, this was a well-oiled machine designed to churn out elite soldiers capable of defending and expanding Sparta's influence across the ancient world. And trust me, their methods would make even the toughest drill sergeants wince. The origins of the Agoge are as shrouded in myth as they are in cold, hard Spartan pragmatism. Lycurgus, the semi-mythical lawgiver, is often credited with dreaming up this rigorous system sometime around the 9th or 8th century BCE. While some folks like to think of Lycurgus as an ancient Steve Jobs of militaristic innovation, others suggest he was more like a collective hallucination or a convenient scapegoat for the radical reforms that shaped Spartan society. Regardless of who he was or wasn't, the Agoge was his legacy, a testament to the Spartan belief that war wasn't just a part of life. It was life itself. At the heart of the Agoge was the idea that every Spartan male should be able to match Achilles in his prime, minus the pesky heel issue. The program was mandatory for all male citizens, turning them into full-time war machines by age 20. But why such a brutal approach? Well, As with most things in history, it boiled down to power and resources. Sparta wasn't blessed with fertile lands or abundant resources, so it relied on its military might to maintain control over a vast network of territories and subjugated peoples, known as helots. These helots did all the hard labor, allowing the Spartans to focus on perfecting their military prowess. The Agoge's economic motivations were as sharp as a Spartan spear. By creating a society that valued military excellence above all else, the Spartans ensured their dominance over the helots, who outnumbered them significantly. Some estimates suggest a ratio of 7-1. Keeping a potentially rebellious population under control required an intimidating and disciplined warrior class, and the Agoge was the factory that produced such warriors in assembly line fashion. Spartan boys entering the Agoge were stripped of all familial comforts, a bit like sending your kid to the strictest boarding school imaginable, only with more spears and less concern for emotional well-being. They were organized into packs or herds and taught to value loyalty to the state above all else. Friendships were encouraged, but only if they served to strengthen the group. Any sign of weakness or individuality was squashed faster than you can say ancient peer pressure. The Agoge was a long, grueling journey. At age 12, the stakes were upped with harsher training and even fewer comforts. Boys were given a single cloak to last the entire year, leaving them exposed to the elements and teaching them to endure hardship. If they wanted more food, they had to steal it, and if they were caught, well, the punishment wasn't for the theft, but for the failure to execute it flawlessly. Think of it as a brutal lesson in both self-reliance and stealth tactics. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the Agoge has been glamorized in literature and film, the reality was harsh and unforgiving. Many boys didn't survive the grueling regimens. Those who did were scarred, both physically and psychologically. They were taught to suppress their emotions and show no mercy, principles that would serve them well on the battlefield, but made for a rather cold society off it. Politically, the Agoge helped maintain a rigid social hierarchy, one where the warrior elite held sway over not only the helots, but also Sparta's allies and enemies. The Agoge created a sense of unity and shared purpose that was hard to find elsewhere in Greece, where city-states often bickered like siblings, fighting over the last piece of baklava. Yet this unity came at a steep price. Individuality was sacrificed on the altar of collective strength. The Agoge's reputation spread far and wide, with visitors from other Greek states coming to gawk at the disciplined Spartan youth like tourists at a bizarre military zoo. But while outsiders marveled at the military machine, they often missed the underlying tensions. The Spartan system was one of constant fear of helot revolts, fear of losing status, fear of failing to live up to the harsh standards set by their society. As we peel back the layers of myth and examine the Agoge's origins, it's clear this wasn't just an exercise in creating super soldiers. It was an elaborate system designed to ensure Sparta's survival in a world where only the strong and disciplined thrived. So next time you hear tales of Spartan warriors, remember the boys who were shipped off at 7, their childhoods traded for the harsh education of the Agoge. It's a reminder that behind every legend lies a reality far more complex and often brutal. As we peel back the layers of myth and examine the Agoge's origins, it's clear this wasn't just an exercise in creating super soldiers. It was an elaborate system designed to ensure Sparta's survival in a world where only the strong and disciplined thrived. So next time you hear tales of Spartan warriors, remember the boys who were shipped off at 7, their childhoods traded for the harsh education of the Agoge. It's a reminder that behind every legend lies a reality far more complex and often brutal. Now, let's dive deeper into the Agoge's training regime, which was about as cozy as a cactus pillow. If you think your gym routine is tough, the Spartan boys would laugh in your protein shake. Their daily grind was a blend of physical endurance, mental toughness, and a sprinkle of what we might call creative discipline. First up, the physical aspect. These lads weren't just lifting weights and calling it a day. Oh no, they were introduced to pankration, a brutal mix of boxing and wrestling that makes MMA look like a friendly game of tag. Imagine grappling in the dirt, with no referee to call a timeout when you've had enough. This was a fight for dominance and survival, and let's just say the ancient Greeks weren't handing out participation trophies. The goal was to emerge stronger, faster, and more resilient, qualities essential for a future Spartan warrior. But the Agoge wasn't just about physical brawn. It was a mental marathon as well. The boys were constantly tested on their ability to endure pain and hardship. This wasn't just sadism masquerading as education. No, it was a calculated effort to instill a resilience that would serve them on the battlefield. If you could tough it out in the Agoge, you were ready for whatever the world could throw at you. This wasn't a boot camp, it was a crucible. And then there were the rations, or lack thereof. The Agoge's approach to food was less all-you-can-eat buffet and more fasting with a side of hunger. The boys were deliberately underfed to teach them self-reliance. They had to forage or steal to make up the difference, and if they got caught, well, that was just a lesson in stealth gone wrong. This wasn't just about keeping them lean and mean, it was about teaching them to fend for themselves in any situation. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for these pint-sized warriors, let's debunk another myth. The notion that Spartan discipline was unyielding and without a trace of humanity isn't quite on the money. These boys weren't robotic soldiers devoid of emotion. They formed bonds, developed friendships, and yes, even had moments of vulnerability. Behind the stoic facades, they were still kids trying to navigate a harsh world. Sure, they were taught to suppress those softer emotions, but they were never entirely erased. The Spartans understood that camaraderie was a powerful tool in battle, and those bonds forged in the fires of the Agoge would often last a lifetime. But why such a relentless focus on discipline and toughness? Simple: fear. The Spartans lived in constant fear of uprising from the Helots, the subjugated population who outnumbered them by a staggering margin. The Agoge was a response to this fear, a way to ensure that every Spartan male was ready to defend their fragile status quo at a moment's notice. It was an insurance policy against the chaos that could erupt if the Helots ever decided they'd had enough of being the underdogs. So, while the Agoge might sound like a medieval cross-fit challenge from the ninth circle of Hades, it had a purpose. It was about survival in a world where the stakes were higher than a mountain goat on a caffeine rush. It was about creating a society that could weather any storm, whether it came from within or outside their borders. In the end, the Agoge was a blend of strategy, necessity, and a touch of madness. It stripped away the comforts of childhood and replaced them with the cold, hard reality of Spartan life. These boys weren't just training for war. They were preparing to uphold an entire civilization's way of life. They were the living embodiment of Sparta's hopes, dreams, and fears, all rolled into one tough-as-nails package. And while the romantic image of the Spartan warrior endures, it's essential to remember the human cost behind the legend. The Agoge took boys and forged them into warriors, but it also took its toll. Not every boy who entered emerged unscathed, and those who did carried the scars, both visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. So, next time you're tempted to romanticize the Spartan way, remember the grit, the grind, and the very real human element behind the myth. And speaking of the human element, let's dive into the camaraderie and competition that defined the Agoge. Now, if you think Spartan boys were all work and no play, you've clearly never heard of their version of team-building exercises. It turns out, creating an army of well-oiled war machines wasn't just about solitary grit. It was also about the power of the pack, or herd, as they called it. You see, the Spartans weren't just training individual warriors. They were engineering an entire social ecosystem where teamwork was as critical as the ability to wield a spear. In the Agoge, boys were grouped into herds, and these weren't just random assortments of kids thrown together like some ancient version of recess. These herds were the bedrock of Spartan social structure, fostering a sense of unity that was crucial on the battlefield. Imagine a high school clique, only with more face paint and fewer yearbooks. Competition among these herds was fierce, and that's putting it lightly. Spartan boys were pitted against each other in everything from wrestling matches to singing contests. That's right, singing. Because when you're marching into battle, a well-timed chorus can be as morale-boosting as a sharp sword. But these weren't your average talent show performances. The stakes were always high, with each victory earning not just bragging rights, but also the respect and admiration of their peers and elders. And let's not forget the role of rivalry. It was the secret sauce that kept the Spartan military machine running smoothly. A bit like how your sibling rivalry might drive you to be better, faster, and stronger, the Spartans understood that a little competitive spirit went a long way. The boys were encouraged to outdo one another, whether in physical feats or tactical smarts. This wasn't just about proving individual prowess. It was about pushing the entire group to new heights. After all, an army is only as strong as its weakest link, and nobody wanted to be that link. Now, here's where things get a bit unexpected. The Agoge, for all its testosterone-fueled bravado, wasn't just a boys' club. Women played a surprisingly significant role in this testosterone-drenched world. Spartan women were the cheerleaders and critics of their society, and they weren't just sitting on the sidelines knitting togas. They were actively involved in the shaping of future warriors. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling with a spear. Spartan women were known for their fierce independence and sharp tongues. They were expected to be as physically fit as their male counterparts, engaging in sports and exercises that would make your average gym rat blush. This wasn't just for vanity's sake. A strong Spartan woman was believed to bear strong Spartan children. And let's face it, in a society obsessed with military strength, producing the next generation of warriors was a top priority. But their influence didn't stop at childbirth. Women often participated in the education of young boys, acting as mentors and motivators. They had no qualms about calling out cowardice or laziness, and their praise was as valuable as any medal. In a society where male approval was the currency of the realm, the endorsement of a Spartan woman was like striking gold. And then there's the role of the Helots, the often overlooked backbone of Spartan society. These subjugated peoples were the ones working the fields, tending to the animals, and generally keeping the Spartan economy afloat while the warriors focused on perfecting their martial skills. It was a symbiotic relationship, albeit one rooted in subjugation and fear. The Helots were the silent partners in the Spartan military ecosystem. They provided the resources and labor that allowed Spartans to live the life of professional soldiers. But this wasn't a partnership of equals. The Spartans kept a tight leash on the Helots, using fear and intimidation to maintain control. The annual Crypteia, a state-sponsored terror campaign, was a grim reminder of this power dynamic. Young Spartans, fresh out of the Agoge, were sent to the countryside to keep the Helots in check, sometimes resorting to violence to instill fear. Yet, despite this oppressive relationship, Helots were sometimes used as auxiliary forces in battle, albeit in the most menial and dangerous roles. Their contribution, though reluctantly given, was essential to the Spartan war machine. It's a sobering reminder that even the most celebrated militaries are often supported by those in the shadows, whose contributions go unsung. So, as we explore the social structures within the Agoge, it's clear that this was more than just a training ground for warriors. It was a microcosm of Spartan society, a place where boys learned the harsh realities of their world, where teamwork and rivalry were woven into the fabric of their lives, and where the roles of women and Helots, though often overlooked, were crucial to the Spartan way of life. The Agoge taught boys to suppress their individuality, to become a part of something greater than themselves. It was about creating a cohesive unit where each member knew their role, and the success of the group depended on the sum of its parts. This sense of collective identity was vital on the battlefield, where the phalanx required absolute trust and coordination. There was no room for glory-seeking mavericks in the Spartan ranks. Every soldier had to play their part flawlessly. But let's not kid ourselves. While camaraderie and competition were essential components of the Agoge, they didn't erase the harshness of the system. Friendships formed under such conditions were often as much about survival as they were about genuine affection. In a world where showing weakness could have dire consequences, even the strongest bonds were tempered with caution. As we unravel the layers of the Agoge, it's evident that this was no ordinary school. It was a crucible of discipline, camaraderie, and competition, where boys were molded into warriors and taught to uphold the values of a society built on military might. And while it's easy to romanticize the Spartan way, it's essential to remember the human cost behind the legend. The Agoge was a place where boyhood was sacrificed on the altar of duty, where individuality was subsumed by the collective, and where the pursuit of excellence was both a blessing and a curse. So, as we continue our journey through the world of the Agoge, let's keep in mind the complexities and contradictions of this ancient institution. It's a tale of strength and sacrifice, of camaraderie and competition, and of a society that placed its faith in the power of the collective. And while the legend of the Spartan warrior endures, it's the human stories behind the myth that truly capture the essence of this remarkable chapter in history. As the Spartan boys transitioned into manhood, the Agoge's indelible mark wasn't just etched on their bodies, but carved deeply into their psyches. These lads weren't merely graduating from a school of hard knocks. They were emerging from a psychological battleground where the currency of survival was mental fortitude. But what did this mean for their new roles as full-fledged warriors? Let's dive into the psychological roller coaster that awaited them. First up, let's talk about the transition from Agoge graduate to Spartan warrior. Picture a 20-year-old, fresh from a decade-long boot camp that makes Navy SEAL training look like an after-school club. These young men, now officially part of the Spartan army, were expected to embody the perfect balance of strength, discipline, and loyalty. But here's the kicker. All those years of learning to suppress emotions like they were enemy spies didn't exactly prepare them for the nuances of adult life. This wasn't just about holding a spear. It was about navigating a society that had zero tolerance for anything less than perfection. The psychological impact of such an upbringing was profound. On one hand, the Agoge churned out individuals who were second to none in terms of military prowess. They were masters of the phalanx formation, able to move in unison with the grace of a well-choreographed dance, albeit one with more bloodshed. Their loyalty to Sparta was unwavering, often to a fanatical degree. But beneath the tough exterior lay a simmering cauldron of repressed emotions and unresolved trauma. After all, being conditioned to view vulnerability as weakness doesn't exactly make for a well-rounded individual. Now, let's add a touch of modern psychology to the mix. The Agoge's emphasis on emotional suppression and rigid discipline left many Spartan men struggling with what we'd recognize today as issues of identity and self-worth. They had been taught to see themselves as part of a collective, their individuality sacrificed at the altar of Spartan glory. This, of course, made them formidable warriors, but not necessarily well-adjusted human beings. Imagine trying to navigate relationships when you've been trained to see empathy as a liability. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with your eyes closed. The Agoge also had a dark side that extended beyond personal struggles. It fostered a culture of violence and aggression that was hard to switch off once the battle cries faded. The skills that made them effective warriors didn't translate well to peacetime, where diplomacy and negotiation often took precedence over brute force. Many Spartans found it difficult to adapt, leading to a society where conflict resolution was more likely to involve a sword than a handshake. But let's not paint an entirely bleak picture. The Agoge did instill a sense of pride and belonging that was hard to match. The graduates formed a brotherhood, bound by shared experiences and a deep-seated loyalty to their homeland. This camaraderie was a double-edged sword, offering both support and a constant reminder of the high stakes. In a society where honor was everything, the fear of letting down their fellow Spartans was a powerful motivator. Yet, this same sense of camaraderie often masked the personal costs of such an upbringing. The pressure to conform to the Spartan ideal left little room for personal growth or exploration. Many Spartans lived in fear of failing to meet the standards set by their society, a fear that could be as crippling as any physical wound. The desire for approval was a constant companion, driving them to feats of bravery and occasionally acts of recklessness that bordered on suicidal. Economically, the Agoge's impact was equally significant. By producing a warrior class dedicated to maintaining Spartan hegemony, it ensured the continued subjugation of the Helots, who bore the brunt of the economic burden. The Helots' labor allowed Spartans to focus on their military duties, but this dependency came at a cost. The ever-present threat of Helot rebellion loomed large, and the need to keep them in check was a constant drain on resources and morale. And what about the personal toll on Spartan men? The Agoge's relentless focus on discipline often left them ill-equipped for the softer aspects of life. Many struggled with expressing emotions, forming meaningful connections, and even understanding their own desires. In a society where vulnerability was tantamount to weakness, these men often found themselves trapped in a cycle of stoicism and silence. The psychological scars of their upbringing were as real as any wound sustained in battle. Yet, despite these challenges, the Spartan warrior remained a symbol of strength and resilience. Their ability to endure hardship and maintain their composure under pressure was legendary, earning them admiration and fear throughout the ancient world. But behind this facade of invincibility lay the complexity of human experience, a tapestry of triumphs and tribulations, shaped by the unforgiving crucible of the Agoge. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Spartan psyche, it's clear that the Agoge was more than just a training ground. It was a forge that molded boys into warriors, but also left an indelible mark on their souls. The transition from trainee to Spartan warrior was as much about psychological resilience as it was about physical prowess. And while the legend of the Spartan warrior endures, it's the human stories behind the myth that truly capture the essence of this remarkable chapter in history. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the Spartan world, let's keep in mind the complexities and contradictions of this ancient society. The Agoge may have been a crucible of discipline and strength, but it was also a stage for the human drama that unfolded within its ranks. The psychological impact on its graduates was profound, a testament to the enduring power of the Agoge's teachings, and a reminder that even the mightiest warriors are, at their core, human. So, as the dust settles on our exploration of the Agoge, let's zoom out and take a good, hard look at its legacy. What did the Agoge leave behind besides a trail of well-chiseled warriors and a culture that prized toughness over tenderness? Well, quite a bit, actually. The Agoge's influence stretches far beyond the walls of ancient Sparta, echoing through the ages and making its mark on modern military training. But before we salute this legacy too hastily, let's unpack the baggage that comes with it. For starters, the idea of rigorous training to forge elite warriors is as old as war itself. But the Agoge took this to new, brutal heights. It wasn't just about training soldiers. It was about crafting an entire societal ethos around military excellence. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you'll notice striking similarities in modern military academies worldwide. The emphasis on discipline, endurance, and unity isn't just a Spartan relic. From West Point to Sandhurst, the echoes of the Agoge's philosophy can still be heard. Those early morning drills, the camaraderie forged in shared hardship, and the relentless pursuit of excellence all have a distinctly Spartan ring to them. It's like the Agoge was the original boot camp, minus the motivational posters and protein bars. But let's not get carried away on a wave of romanticism. The Agoge was more than just a training program. It was a crucible that demanded total submission to the state's ideals. In modern times, we often grapple with the balance between individualism and collectivism, personal freedom versus societal responsibility. The Spartans, however, had made their choice clear. The individual existed only to serve the state. Today, we might find this notion a bit hard to swallow, preferring a more nuanced approach that values personal agency. Yet, the Agoge's legacy challenges us to consider the costs of both extremes. Now, let's talk about the Spartan warrior myth, the one that Hollywood loves to dust off and parade around like a prized trophy. Yes, the Spartans were formidable fighters, and yes, they made for great cinema, but the reality was far more complex. These weren't invincible demigods. They were human beings, shaped by a society that demanded everything and offered little in return. The Agoge trained them to suppress emotions, to view vulnerability as a cardinal sin. While this made them fearsome on the battlefield, it didn't exactly set them up for a fulfilling life off it. Imagine winning a battle, but losing the war for personal happiness. That's a Spartan paradox for you. Of course, the romantic allure of the Spartan warrior endures, partly because it taps into the timeless appeal of heroism and sacrifice. Who doesn't love a good story about overcoming adversity, about rising to greatness in the face of overwhelming odds? The Spartans embodied this narrative, which is why their legend continues to captivate us. But let's not forget that behind the myth lies a harsher truth, a society that valued martial prowess above all else and left little room for anything softer. Economically speaking, the Agoge played a pivotal role in maintaining the Spartan system, which was, let's face it, a bit of a house of cards. The Helots, those subjugated souls, were the foundation on which the Spartan economy rested. Their labor allowed the Spartans to focus on war instead of farming. Yet this dependency was a double-edged sword. The constant fear of rebellion meant that Sparta was always on high alert, its warrior class ever ready to quash any whiff of dissent. It's like having a high-maintenance insurance policy, necessary but constantly threatening to bankrupt you. The Agoge's legacy, then, is a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies. It reminds us that even the most celebrated military systems are built on human sacrifice, not just on the battlefield, but in the everyday lives of those who serve. The Spartans achieved greatness, but at what cost? Their society thrived on the blood, sweat, and tears of its people, demanding unwavering loyalty and stoic endurance in return. In the end, the Agoge was as much a testament to human resilience as it was to the limits of such a relentless pursuit. As we reflect on what it truly meant to be a Spartan, we find ourselves caught between admiration and critique. The Agoge's enduring influence challenges us to consider the balance between discipline and humanity, between the needs of the state and the rights of the individual. It forces us to question the narratives we construct about heroism and sacrifice, to acknowledge both the glory and the grim realities that lie beneath. In wrapping up our journey through the Agoge, let's leave the last word to the human stories behind the myth. The Spartan legacy is a powerful reminder that history isn't just a series of epic battles and grand strategies. It's the sum of countless lives, each shaped by the forces of their time, each struggling to find meaning in a world that demanded everything. The Agoge was a crucible, yes, but it was also a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature, a nature that, despite the passage of time, remains as multifaceted and compelling as ever. So, the next time you hear the rallying cry of "This is Sparta," remember that behind the bravado lies a deeper tale of sacrifice and survival, of a society that walked a tightrope between greatness and the abyss. The Spartans may have left their mark on history, but it's the lessons they leave us with that truly endure. Your day in ancient Tyre kicks off not with a latte, but with the unmistakable aroma of cedarwood and the clamor of chisels. It's the kind of morning where you can practically taste the salt from the Mediterranean mingle with the sawdust in the air. Welcome to the epicenter of Phoenician shipbuilding, a place where the art of crafting vessels is as vital as the fish in the sea. Now, before you romanticize this scene as some idyllic coastal workshop, let's get real. Tyre, one of the great Phoenician cities, isn't just a quaint seaside town. It's a bustling hub of maritime commerce. Ships aren't built here just for the love of the craft. Nope, this is the ancient world's version of Silicon Valley, a high-demand, high-stakes industry where supply and demand for ships keep the economy afloat. Pun intended. Phoenicia, nestled along the coastline of what we now call Lebanon, was the maritime equivalent of a modern-day economic powerhouse. Think of them as the Amazon of antiquity. But instead of two-day shipping, they offered ships that could sail the high seas and facilitate trade across the Mediterranean. These aren't just any old boats. They are the backbone of an empire, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and yes, even the occasional pirate raid. The demand for ships in this era is through the roof, like the Black Friday of the ancient world. Why? Because everyone wants a piece of the Mediterranean pie, and the Phoenicians have the secret recipe. Their ships are the Ferraris of the sea, sleek, fast, and built to last. We're talking about long, narrow, and agile vessels that can outrun competitors and outmaneuver pirates. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before these maritime marvels can set sail, there's months of back-breaking labor involved, and it all starts with the raw materials. You might think that building these aquatic chariots is a quaint little craft, but you're in for a surprise. The heart of the operation lies in the forests of Lebanon, where the prized cedar trees grow tall and proud. These aren't just any trees. They are the rock stars of the timber world, and they come with a price tag to match. Cedar is to Phoenician shipbuilding what silicon is to modern tech, essential and expensive. The cost of cedar timber was steep. It said that the kings of Tyre would pay in gold, silver, and sometimes even their daughters' hands in marriage to secure a steady supply. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. Right about now, you might be picturing a group of happy-go-lucky craftsmen singing sea shanties while they carve out the hulls. Let's burst that bubble. These shipbuilders are not artists in a romantic sense. They are laborers, and their work is grueling. The daily grind involves hauling massive logs, carving, and assembling them into the sleek hulls that are the pride of Phoenician engineering. It's a far cry from the leisurely pace of a Sunday craft fair. And here's where the myth-busting really hits home: the labor costs. Most workers are not free artisans, but rather slaves or low-paid laborers who toil from sunrise to sunset. The shipyard is less a place of dreams and more a sweat-soaked reality of constant noise and relentless pressure. Imagine working all day, every day, for nothing more than a meager meal and the threat of the overseer's whip. This is no Disney fairy tale, folks. Yet, despite the hardships, there's something undeniably impressive about the scale and sophistication of this operation. The Phoenicians are master organizers, deploying a workforce that can rival a modern-day assembly line. They have shipwrights, carpenters, rope makers, and metalworkers all working in unison to produce vessels that are not just functional but formidable on the open seas. As the day progresses, the shipyard becomes a symphony of activity. You can hear the rhythmic thud of hammers and the screech of saws cutting through timber. Overseeing this cacophony is the shipwright, part engineer, part project manager, and all business. He's the one making sure every plank is perfect, every joint is seamless, and every ship is seaworthy. His reputation and the city's economy depend on it. By midday, the sun is high, and the heat is relentless. Workers take a brief pause to refuel, likely with some bread, olives, and maybe a bit of fish if they're lucky. It's a far cry from the power lunches of executives today, but it's enough to keep the gears moving. So, as you stand in the heart of this ancient shipbuilding hub, ask yourself, what's the real story here? Is it the romanticized vision of noble craftsmen plying their trade by the sea? Or is it the gritty, unglamorous reality of hard labor, economic necessity, and the relentless pursuit of profit? It's both, and it's neither. Because much like the ships they build, the truth is layered, complex, and built to withstand the test of time. But we're not just here to ponder existential questions, are we? Let's roll up our sleeves and plunge into the social jungle of the Phoenician shipyard. Picture it, a bustling hive of activity where social dynamics are as intricate as the cedar shavings on the ground. In this world, you're not just a cog in the machine. You're part of a complex social hierarchy, whether you like it or not. At the top of this pyramid sits the master shipwright. This guy is the rock star of the shipyard, commanding respect, or at least grudging acknowledgement, from everyone around him. His job is not just about engineering brilliance, it's about managing egos, resources, and the ever-looming deadlines. Below him, you've got a cadre of skilled artisans, folks who've been at this long enough to know their way around the keel and who can wield a chisel like a maestro conducts an orchestra. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous side. The reality is that much of the shipyard's workforce consists of slaves and low-paid laborers, the unsung heroes, or perhaps the overworked and underappreciated ones, who do the heavy lifting. These guys are the backbone of the operation, even if they don't get a fancy title or a corner office. Their work is grueling, repetitive, and let's be honest, thankless. In this world, the politics of Phoenician trade are as volatile as the Mediterranean Sea. Who gets the cushy jobs, the ones with a bit more prestige and maybe a little less back-breaking labor, often depends on connections, bribes, and good old-fashioned favoritism. It's like ancient nepotism on steroids. If your uncle happens to be on good terms with the overseer, you might just find yourself with a slightly better gig. And let's talk about the cedar, the real prima donna of the shipyard. This isn't just any old wood. It's the creme de la creme of timber, and its acquisition is a saga in itself. Lebanese cedar is prized not only for its durability and resistance to rot, but also for its straight grain and aromatic scent. These trees are the original divas, growing up to 130 feet tall and taking decades to mature. Harvesting them is no small feat. Imagine trudging through dense forests, chopping down these giants, and then figuring out how to transport them overland to the shipyard. Once those majestic trees make their way to the coast, they're greeted like royalty. You might say cedar is the Phoenicians' secret weapon, their not-so-secret source that makes their ships the envy of every maritime power in the ancient world. The wood's legendary status isn't just hype. It's backed by the fact that the Egyptians, among others, would trade gold and luxury goods to get their hands on it. Now, if you think the shipyard is just a bunch of burly men grunting and sweating over wood, think again. This place is a microcosm of Phoenician society, and the politics here mirror those of the larger city. The workers have their own pecking order, with veterans often holding more sway than greenhorns. Those who have proven their mettle might even get a say in how things are run, though ultimate power remains firmly in the hands of the shipwright and overseers. Let's not forget the economic stakes. The ships built here are not just vessels. They are the lifeblood of Phoenician trade. Each ship that rolls out of the yard represents a significant investment, both in terms of resources and labor. The pressure to produce top-notch vessels is immense, and any slip-up could mean financial disaster. It's a bit like being in the startup world, where one failed product launch can sink the whole operation. But despite the hardships and hierarchies, there's a certain camaraderie among the workers. The shipyard is a place where lifelong bonds are forged, where people from different walks of life come together for a common purpose. It's gritty, it's tough, and it's a far cry from the romantic notion of a quaint little workshop by the sea. Here, reality is as unyielding as the timber they shape, and myth is just a comforting story told to make the daily grind a little more bearable. So, as you navigate this world of sweat and sawdust, remember that the Phoenician shipyard is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. It's where dreams of conquest and commerce are carved into reality, one plank at a time. And while the romance of the sea may draw you in, it's the relentless, unglamorous toil that truly keeps this ancient industry afloat. Now, as the midday sun climbs higher and the Phoenician shipyard buzzes with energy, let's delve into the nitty-gritty of how these ancient vessels went from blueprint to seafaring reality. You might imagine a process akin to assembling a DIY bookshelf, but trust me, we're talking about an operation that rivals a modern-day space launch in complexity and precision. First off, let's debunk the notion that Phoenician ships were all about opulence and grandeur. Sure, the term floating palaces gets tossed around, but in reality, these vessels were more like the Swiss Army knives of the sea, practical, versatile, and ready for anything. They weren't designed to impress with luxury. They were built to survive the unpredictability of the Mediterranean, which, let's face it, could be as temperamental as a cat on a rainy day. The technical brilliance of Phoenician shipbuilding starts with the design. Picture a long, slender hull, perfect for cutting through water at speed, an ancient version of a sports car. These ships weren't just about moving goods, they were about moving fast. The typical Phoenician galley was around 100 feet long and 15 feet wide, a tight squeeze for the crew but ideal for agility. And while they weren't exactly luxury liners, they were built to last, with some vessels enduring voyages that spanned thousands of miles and numerous trading seasons. The real magic, though, lay in the construction. The Phoenicians employed a technique called shell-first construction. This involved building the hull first by meticulously joining planks together with wooden pegs and lashings, and then adding the internal framework. Think of it like crafting a hard outer shell before putting in the guts. It's a method that allowed for flexibility and strength, both crucial for handling the Mediterranean's moody temperament. Now, if you're picturing a serene scene with artisans delicately sanding wood, pour a little reality into that cup. This was more like an ancient assembly line, where speed and efficiency were the names of the game. The shipyard was a cacophony of activity, with saws screeching, hammers thudding, and the occasional shout of frustration when something didn't quite fit. It was a place where even the most seasoned craftsmen could lose a finger if they weren't on their toes. And let's not forget the engineering marvels that these shipbuilders managed to pull off. Take the Phoenician invention of the bireme, for instance. This wasn't just a ship, it was a game changer. With 2 rows of oarsmen, these vessels could achieve greater speed and maneuverability than their single-deck counterparts. It was like upgrading from a tricycle to a full-blown Harley-Davidson. The bireme became the backbone of Phoenician naval power, a testament to the ingenuity that kept them ahead of their seafaring rivals. But don't let the allure of innovation fool you into thinking these ships were invincible. They were wooden boats, after all, and subject to the whims of nature and war. The Mediterranean was a veritable minefield of hazards, storms that could tear sails to shreds, pirates with a penchant for plunder, and let's not forget the occasional rogue wave that could send even the sturdiest vessel to Davy Jones' larker. Economically, these ships were investments that carried a hefty price tag, sort of like buying a Ferrari today, but with the added risk of it being hijacked by pirates or sunk by a storm. The cost of building a ship could set a city-state back by thousands of drachmas, a small fortune that required careful planning and substantial backing, often from the city-state's elite. And when one of these prized vessels was lost at sea, it wasn't just a hit to the pride, It was an economic blow that could ripple through the entire community. So, what's the real story behind these floating palaces? They're a blend of myth and reality. Sure, they sound romantic in tales of old, but the truth is they were marvels of practicality, built for trade, speed, and survival. The Phoenicians weren't in the business of building pleasure yachts. They were crafting the workhorses of the ancient world, vessels that could haul cargo, explore uncharted waters, and hold their own against would-be conquerors. As the day wears on and the heat rises, the shipyard becomes a living testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. Workers continue their labor, driven by necessity more than by choice, while the overseers keep a watchful eye on both the progress and the bottom line. It's a world where the line between myth and reality blurs, where grand stories meet gritty truths, and where the relentless pursuit of progress shapes everything. Keep your eyes on the horizon, though, because as much as we've unpacked today, there's still more to explore. A world of trade routes, voyages, and the enduring legacy of Phoenician seafaring that will continue to unravel. So, stay tuned, because the seas of history are vast, and we've only just set sail. So, as we sail further into the economic strategies that kept Phoenician ships, and by extension, the entire civilization, buoyant, let's cast a spotlight on their mastery of trade routes. You see, the Phoenicians were the original globetrotters, the Marco Polos of the ancient Mediterranean, only without the fancy journals, and let's be honest, a whole lot more sea salt in their hair. Picture a map of the ancient world, and now imagine it crisscrossed with trade routes that look like they were drawn by an over-caffeinated toddler. Lines darting from one coastal city to another, connecting Phoenicia to places as far-flung as Spain and the British Isles. This was the Phoenician playground, a sprawling maritime network that stretched over 500 miles. That's right, these folks were trading tin from Cornwall, silver from Iberia, and even the occasional exotic luxury from Egypt or Mesopotamia. It's like they had a GPS before GPS was cool, and they didn't even need a rerouting option when things got dicey. Now, you might think that such an expansive trade network was solely the result of some ancient nautical genius. But let's be real. This was as much about guts and gambles as it was about skill. The Phoenicians weren't just navigating the seas. They were navigating a complex web of political alliances and rivalries. They had to charm some city-states, outmaneuver others, and occasionally bribe a local official or two. It was a high-stakes game where the currency was anything from fine Tyrian purple dye to those precious cedar logs. And speaking of Tyrian purple, this wasn't just any dye. It was the Instagram influencer of colors, so rare that it took thousands of murex snails to dye just a single garment, making it more exclusive than the most limited edition sneaker drop today. But let's not forget the economic backbone of all this maritime shenanigan, the shipbuilding industry itself. This was no cottage industry. It was a full-blown economic juggernaut. By the 10th century BCE, Phoenician ships were the envy of every Mediterranean power. Why? Because they were the cargo haulers, the warships, and the passenger liners of their day, all rolled into one. And each vessel that slipped into the sea from the bustling ports of Tyre, Sidon, or Byblos wasn't just a ship. It was a floating asset, a mobile marketplace, and sometimes a diplomatic envoy. Now, here's where things get spicy. You might think that the Phoenicians had it all figured out, but was it pure nautical prowess, or just plain audacity that kept them afloat? After all, the sea wasn't exactly a friendly neighborhood. Pirates were as common as barnacles, and hostile city-states lurked around every cape, ready to take a bite out of any stray Phoenician ship. But the Phoenicians had a secret weapon, audacity. They weren't afraid to push the boundaries, to sail beyond the horizon where others feared to venture. If there was a new market to tap into or a new resource to exploit, you could bet your bottom drachma that a Phoenician ship was on its way there. Their audacity also showed in their willingness to adapt, just as today's tech giants pivot their business models faster than you can say, IPO. The Phoenicians were quick to adjust their sails, literally and figuratively, to the ever-changing winds of the Mediterranean economy. When the Assyrians came knocking with their imperial ambitions, the Phoenicians didn't just roll over. They played the political field, becoming vassals when necessary and trading partners when profitable. They were the ultimate opportunists, and in a cutthroat world, that was the kind of adaptability that kept their coffers filled and their shipyards busy. Speaking of those shipyards, let's dive back into the economic nitty-gritty. The costs of building a ship were astronomical, with some estimates suggesting that a single vessel could cost upwards of 30,000 silver shekels. To put that in perspective, that's about the same as funding a small army or buying a few dozen luxury chariots. But the payoff? Oh, it was worth every shekel. A successful trading voyage could bring back profits 10 times the original investment. It was a gamble, sure, but one where the odds were often in the Phoenicians' favor, thanks to their extensive trade networks and shrewd business acumen. So, as the sun sets on our day in ancient Phoenicia, let's not just marvel at their ships' sleek lines or their dyes' vibrant hues. Let's appreciate the sheer chutzpah it took to build an empire on the unpredictable seas. It was a world of daring adventurers and savvy traders, where ships were more than just vessels. They were the lifeblood of a civilization that thrived on risk, reward, and the relentless pursuit of the next big opportunity. And with that, we set our sights on the horizon, ready to explore more of what made these Phoenicians the legendary seafarers they were. There's still so much more to uncover, from their interactions with other ancient powers to the cultural exchanges that took place on those bustling docks. But for now, let's haul anchor and leave room for the next leg of this epic journey through the annals of history. As we chart the final leg of our Phoenician odyssey, let's drop anchor on the myths that have swirled around these ancient mariners like a Mediterranean mist. Sure, tales of their exploits paint them as the swashbuckling James Bonds of the ancient world, but let's peel back the layers and see what's really beneath those romantic sails. First up on the myth-busting hit list, the notion that Phoenicians were the lone wolves of the sea, operating in splendid isolation. In reality, their success was as much about diplomacy as it was about nautical prowess. These were shrewd negotiators who knew that building alliances was just as crucial as building ships. Working with, rather than against, local powers was their ace in the hole. Their strategy was less conquer and colonize, and more trade and thrive. And what about those legendary Phoenician navigational skills? While it's true they were adept at reading the stars and the sea, let's not forget that the Mediterranean isn't exactly the Bermuda Triangle. The routes were well-trodden, and while they did venture beyond the Pillars of Hercules, most of their journeys were about connecting the darts between established ports. It's like being praised for having the best GPS when you're only driving down the interstate. Sure, it's impressive, but it's not exactly uncharted territory. Now, let's tackle the idea that these folks were the original pirates of the Mediterranean, with a swashbuckling swagger that would make Jack Sparrow blush. Sure, they had their share of skirmishes, and maybe a bit of plunder on the side, but piracy wasn't their main gig. The real treasure was in trade. They were more about balance sheets than booty, and their legacy is rooted in commerce, not corsairs. It's kind of like thinking of Bill Gates as a hacker, technically true at one point, but not the main story. Speaking of legacy, let's sail into the impact of Phoenician shipbuilding on modern maritime practices. Their pioneering hull designs and construction techniques laid the groundwork for centuries of naval architecture. The shell-first method they championed. It's echoed in the frame-first method that dominated shipbuilding for millennia, and those biremes and triremes. They set the stage for the naval arms races that powered empires from Athens to Rome. It's like discovering that your favorite band sound was inspired by a garage band that never got the fame but all the influence. Economically, the Phoenicians were the progenitors of globalization. They didn't just build ships. They built networks. Their trade routes were the ancient equivalent of fiber optic cables, transmitting goods, ideas, and culture across continents. They were the Silk Road of the sea, a precursor to the global supply chains that define our current era. It's like realizing the internet wasn't invented by a single genius, but was the natural evolution of centuries of interconnected human endeavor. As we wind down this day in ancient Tyre, let's reflect on the blend of myth and reality. The Phoenicians were not the demigods of the sea that legends might suggest, nor were they merely the sum of their cedar logs and purple dyes. They were a complex society navigating the choppy waters of economic necessity and political pragmatism. It's a reminder that history isn't just a collection of grand stories. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads of human experience. So, as you lay your head down and drift into dreams of cedar-scented shipyards and the distant cry of a seagull, ponder the cheeky grin with which history sails between myth and reality. Because while the stories we tell may be gilded with romance, it's the gritty, unvarnished truths that anchor us to the past. The Phoenicians may have vanished into the annals of time, but their legacy, like a well-built ship, continues to ride the waves of history. And that, my friend, is the enduring truth that even the most fanciful myth cannot outshine. If you were strutting around medieval England, thinking you'd just wander into the woods for an afternoon hunt, you might want to think again. Back then, hunting was less of a pastime and more of an exclusive club. And trust me, the medieval elite guarded their forests more fiercely than modern celebrities guard their gated communities. We're talking private jets for the 12th century, but with bows and arrows instead of first-class service. Now, why was everyone so obsessed with hunting? Well, it wasn't just about bagging a deer for dinner. Nope, hunting was a status symbol, a bit like driving a Ferrari through a village where everyone else has mopeds. It was a way for the upper class to flaunt their wealth, power, and connection to the king. These were the days when being elite meant demonstrating your prowess over nature, and what better way than to chase down a stag with your trusty hounds and a group of well-dressed friends. Plus, let's face it, nothing screams, "I'm better than you," quite like having a forest all to yourself. Speaking of forests, these weren't just any old woodlands. The medieval English forest was more like a sovereign state with its own set of rules. Enter the Forest Laws of 1079, brought to you by William the Conqueror. These laws were stricter than a nun with a ruler and made sure the forests were reserved for the king's use, or rather, the king's fun. Trespassing, or heaven forbid, poaching, was treated as seriously as stealing a royal crown. You might as well have been caught hot-wiring the king's carriage. Under these laws, forests became off-limits to most common folk. Only the king and his cronies had the privilege, nay, the divine right to hunt in these sacred groves, and the punishment for breaking these laws. Let's just say, medieval justice didn't mess around. Poaching could land you with some seriously unpleasant penalties, the kind that make a modern parking ticket look like a love note. In some unfortunate cases, it could mean losing a hand or an eye, a pretty steep price for a few pounds of venison. But what about those who dared to poach? Well, these folks were the medieval rebels, the Robin Hoods of the time, if Robin Hood was less about robbing the rich and more about nicking a pheasant. They were often driven by necessity rather than rebellion. After all, the forests were teeming with game, and when your family was starving, the lure of a fat deer could be irresistible. The problem was, getting caught meant facing the full wrath of the forest law, a prospect as terrifying as a Game of Thrones finale. Now, the romantic notion of the noble outlaw is all well and good, but the reality was far grimmer. The forest was no idyllic green haven, it was a political battlefield. To the ruling elite, it was a sign of power and control. To the weary peasant, it was a reminder of their place in the feudal pecking order, somewhere near the bottom. If you weren't in the king's favor, you weren't in the forest, simple as that. Despite the draconian nature of these laws, the forest laws did have their appeal for the elite. They provided a structured way to maintain the king's land, preserve game for hunting, and demonstrate authority. It was a system that emphasized order and control, ensuring the forests remained pristine playgrounds for those with the right connections. The rest of the population, well, they could keep dreaming or risk life and limb for a taste of forbidden meat. So next time you're wandering through a park, spare a thought for those medieval peasants who couldn't even dream of such freedom. The forest was a symbol of untouchable power, a place where the rules were as thick as the trees, and the consequences for trespassing were as sharp as a huntsman's arrow. If history teaches us anything, it's that the past was a different country, one with a lot more restrictions on who gets to play in the woods. But let's not get lost in the woods dreaming of medieval justice. Let's talk cold, hard cash. You might think a day in the forest, chasing after deer, wouldn't break the bank. But in medieval England, hunting was a wallet-draining extravaganza. We're not just talking about grabbing a bow and some arrows from the local blacksmith. Oh no, the aristocrats turned hunting into a full-blown production, complete with an entourage that would put a modern movie set to shame. First, you needed hounds, lots of them. A nobleman's pack could number anywhere from 20 to 60 dogs, each specifically trained for different types of game. And these weren't your average mutts. They were the canine equivalent of a luxury sports car. Breeding, training, and maintaining these hounds was a costly affair. Kennel masters, handlers, and trainers were employed to keep the four-legged team in top condition, and they didn't work for free. Feeding a pack of dogs could easily cost a small fortune, especially when their diet included meat, grains, and even cheese. Yes, you heard right, cheese for dogs. We're talking about gourmet canine dining that would make modern pet pampering look like a budget option. Then there's the gear. Oh, the gear. Hunting wasn't just about function, it was a fashion statement. The medieval hunting outfit was a display of wealth and taste, often made of the finest materials available. Think silk, velvet, and leather, all intricately embroidered and tailored to perfection. You didn't just carry any old bow. You had a bow crafted by the finest artisans, sometimes inlaid with gold or silver. You see, the hunt was less about the deer and more about the spectacle, the medieval version of an Instagram photo op, where the goal was to flaunt your status and taste to anyone who might be watching or hearing about it later through the medieval grapevine. And let's not forget the logistics of it all. Hosting a hunt was akin to organizing a festival. You needed servants to set up campsites, cooks to prepare lavish feasts, and musicians to entertain your guests. It was a mobile court, a roving display of wealth and power that moved with the grace of a well-oiled machine, assuming, of course, you had the resources to keep it all running smoothly. Now, why would anyone go through such trouble and expense for a bit of sport? The answer lies in the medieval social hierarchy, where hunting was more than just recreation. It was a political tool. A successful hunt could solidify alliances, demonstrate prowess, and showcase your ability to provide for and protect your followers. It was a chance to rub elbows with the king or other powerful lords, to be seen and remembered in the right circles. Think of it as the medieval version of networking at a high-powered conference, just with more mud and fewer PowerPoint slides. The political implications were vast. By hosting a hunt, a noble could reinforce their loyalty to the crown, while simultaneously flaunting their autonomy and resources. It was a delicate balance of power, a dance of diplomacy played out under the forest canopy. And while the allure of the hunt was undeniable, the stakes were high. A failed hunt, or worse, an embarrassing incident, could tarnish reputations and strain alliances. In a world where perception was everything, the forest was both a stage and a battleground. But let's not kid ourselves. There was plenty of romanticism in the air. The idea of the noble hunter, master of his domain, was a compelling image, steeped in legend and lore. Yet, beneath the shiny veneer was the gritty reality of medieval politics, where every arrow shot was an investment in future power plays. As we ponder the absurdity of spending a king's ransom on what was essentially a day in the woods, we can't help but marvel at how little has changed. Today, we might not be decked out in velvet tunics as we head out with our selfie sticks, but the desire to display status and power through leisure activities is just as alive. Whether it's the latest tech gadget or a luxury vacation, the game remains the same. So next time you see a pristine forest or a well-groomed park, think about the medieval nobles who turned nature into a backdrop for their own personal theater. The hunt was never just about the chase. It was about the spectacle, the power, and the price of playing the game. And while the forests of medieval England have long since reclaimed their secrets, the echoes of those costly hunts still linger in the rustling leaves and whispering winds. The echoes of those costly hunts may linger, but let's shift our focus from the grandeur of the chase to the motley crew that made it all happen. You see, a hunting party in medieval England was less about knights in shining armor charging through the woods and more like a dysfunctional family reunion, complete with bickering cousins and a power-hungry uncle. At the top of this peculiar social pyramid sat the lord, the big cheese, whose word was as absolute as the king's, or at least he liked to think so. The lord was the mastermind, orchestrating the hunt like a general readying for battle. He was the face of the operation, the one who got to pose with the biggest stag at the end of the day. But beneath the shiny veneer of his authority was a web of intrigue and backstabbing that would make a modern office drama look like child's play. These hunts were as much about social climbing as they were about stalking prey. A chance to curry favor with the lord was not to be missed. After all, a well-timed compliment or a subtle dig could shift allegiances faster than you can say, "Game pie." Beneath the lord were the knights and nobles, each with their own agenda. Contrary to popular belief, these knights weren't exactly gallant heroes on a noble quest. They were more like medieval socialites, jockeying for position, trading favors, and sometimes even sabotaging each other for a share of the glory. Imagine a group of high schoolers competing for prom king, but with horses and hunting horns instead of tuxedos and corsages. Then there were the huntsmen, the unsung heroes of the operation. These guys were the seasoned pros, the ones who actually knew the difference between a deer and a doe. They were the tactical brains behind the hunt, directing the hounds, tracking the game, and ensuring everything ran as smoothly as possible. Think of them as the stage managers of this woodland theater, making sure the stars could shine without tripping over their own egos. At the bottom, and I mean rock bottom, were the beaters. These poor souls were the medieval equivalent of unpaid interns, tasked with the dirty work of flushing out the game. Armed with sticks and a healthy dose of fear, they would crash through the underbrush, startling animals out of hiding and into the waiting arms of the noble hunters. It was a thankless job, one that often ended with a grunt and a groan rather than a pat on the back. But hey, someone had to do it right. Let's not forget the servants, the ones who kept the wheels turning behind the scenes. From the cooks preparing feasts fit for a king to the grooms tending to the horses, these were the folks who ensured the lord and his entourage could focus on the hunt, instead of worrying about trivial matters like food and shelter. While they didn't get any of the glory, their work was crucial in maintaining the illusion of effortless nobility. So, what was the appeal of being part of this medieval menagerie? For the beaters and lower ranks, it was a rare opportunity to rub shoulders with the elite, chance to be seen and perhaps even rewarded for their efforts. For the knights and nobles, it was all about politics, an opportunity to advance their own interests and secure a more favorable position in the Lord's court. And for the Lord himself, well, it was a heady mix of power, prestige, and the thrill of the chase. Of course, not every hunt ended in triumph. The woods were as unpredictable as the weather, and a sudden downpour or an elusive stag could spoil even the best-laid plans. When things went wrong, fingers were quick to point, and blame was as common as the mud underfoot. A botched hunt could tarnish reputations faster than a medieval gossip session, and in a world where honor was everything, that was a risk no one wanted to take. But let's not kid ourselves. These hunts were also a breeding ground for tales and legends. The romantic image of the lone knight, wandering the forest in search of adventure, is a compelling one. Yet, the reality was a lot less glamorous. It was a world of mud, sweat, and tears, where the real battles were fought not with swords, but with words and wits. It was a place where alliances were made and broken, where fortunes were won and lost, and where the line between friend and foe was as thin as a hunting arrow. So next time you picture a medieval hunt, spare a thought for the beaters, the knights, and the lords, each playing their part in this grand spectacle. It was a world of contradictions, where the pursuit of power was as much a game as the hunt itself. And while the forest may have been a stage, the drama that unfolded within its leafy confines was as real as the arrows that flew through the air. As we wander deeper into the woods of medieval society, remember this. Every hunt was a microcosm of the world outside, a reflection of the social hierarchies and power struggles that defined the age. It was a time of great ambition and even greater risk, where the stakes were as high as the trees were tall. And as the dust settled and the echoes of the hunt faded into the distance, the forest remained, a silent witness to the triumphs and tragedies of those who dared to play the game. While the medieval forest stood as a silent witness to all this human drama, it was anything but untouched by the chaos. You see, for every regal chase through the woods, there was an environmental price tag that would make today's conservationists wince. Hunting wasn't just a pastime, but a full-scale operation, and the wildlife of medieval England bore the brunt of it. First off, let's talk numbers, specifically the kind that involved antlers and hooves. Medieval hunts weren't like your quaint Sunday stroll with a bow. They were more akin to military campaigns, with battalions of nobles and their entourages descending on the forest like a swarm of locusts. The most prized quarry, deer, fallow, red, roe. If it had antlers, it was fair game. And we're not talking about a single deer here and there. Records suggest that on a particularly good day, a hunting party could bring down dozens of deer. We're talking about a medieval version of Black Friday, where every deer had a target on its back. And what did all this hunting mean for your average medieval deer? Well, let's just say their calendars were perpetually booked with a one-way ticket to the afterlife. With such intensive hunting practices, deer populations often faced significant pressure. Overhunting could lead to localized extinctions, and the ripple effect on the ecosystem was as real as a catapult to the face. When deer numbers dropped, it wasn't just venison that disappeared from the menu. Predators like wolves and lynxes also felt the crunch, as their primary food source dwindled faster than a medieval banquet spread. Now, you might be wondering, didn't anyone think to pump the brakes on this medieval wildlife bonanza? Enter the concept of the deer park, a bizarre blend of conservation and culinary convenience. Deer parks were essentially early attempts at wildlife management, albeit with a twist. These enclosed areas were designed to keep deer in and poachers out, ensuring a steady supply of game for those who could afford the luxury. Picture a medieval version of a drive-through, where the menu was always stocked with fresh venison. The irony of it all, these parks weren't about preserving nature for nature's sake. Nope, their primary function was to ensure that the elite could continue their lavish feasts without interruption. It was conservation with a capital C, for cuisine, not conservation as we think of it today. Deer parks were carefully managed, with breeding programs and even the occasional introduction of new bloodlines to keep those antlers sprouting. The goal was simple: keep the venison coming and the tables groaning under the weight of medieval gastronomy. And it wasn't just deer that found themselves in the crosshairs of medieval hunters. Boars, hares, and even birds found their way into the medieval recipe book. Boar hunting, for example, was considered the ultimate test of bravery and skill. But continual hunting of these animals could lead to ecological imbalances. With top predators often being hunted to extinction to protect livestock, the ecosystem was like a medieval seesaw. One wrong move, and everything came crashing down. Moreover, the construction of deer parks and hunting grounds often required altering the landscape significantly. Trees were felled, land was cleared, and fences erected, all of which disrupted the habitat of countless species. While the elite enjoyed their controlled wilderness, the natural world bore the cost of their entertainment. It's a classic case of one group's leisure being another's upheaval. Now, before you go thinking the medieval elite were all villains twirling their mustaches, it's important to understand the context. In their minds, they were the guardians of the land, responsible for managing resources for future feasts and festivities. They were operating within a framework where maintaining the abundance of game was crucial, not just for their tables, but for their status. The ability to provide lavish hunts was a sign of power, and a healthy deer park was as much a status symbol as a modern sports car. But here's the kicker. Despite all the management and regulations, nature had a funny way of rebelling against human control. Disease, harsh winters, and unpredictable weather could still throw even the best-laid plans into chaos. A particularly nasty winter could decimate deer populations, and a plague among animals could spread faster than gossip at a medieval court. In these moments, the delicate balance the elite tried to maintain was exposed for what it was, a fragile construct at the mercy of the natural world. So, what can we take away from this medieval tale of hunting and habitat? Perhaps it's a reminder that the pursuit of power, whether through venison feasts or velvet tunics, often comes with unintended consequences. The medieval hunting grounds were more than just a stage for noble theatrics. They were a microcosm of human ambition and its impact on the natural world. It's a story of excess and control, of abundance and scarcity, a tale as old as time, echoing through the ages like the call of a distant hunting horn. As we leave the medieval woods behind, let's not forget the lessons they whisper, that human desires, no matter how grand or trivial, leave their mark on the world around us, and that sometimes, despite our best efforts to manage and control, nature has a way of reminding us who's really in charge. As we've seen, the medieval forests weren't just leafy backdrops for hunting pageants. They were arenas where power, prestige, and politics played out under a canopy of oaks. Fast forward to today, and you'd be surprised how those old hunting traditions have left their paw prints all over modern laws and conservation efforts. Medieval hunting wasn't just about chasing deer and flaunting status. It laid the groundwork for a complex relationship between humans and wildlife that still echoes through our legal systems and conservation strategies. First off, those forest laws we talked about, William the Conqueror's draconian rules about who could hunt where, weren't simply about keeping the peasants out. They were early attempts at wildlife management, albeit with a rather elite-centric twist. Think of it as the medieval version of today's national parks, but with more chainmail and fewer park rangers. By restricting hunting rights, the Crown effectively managed game populations, though primarily for the benefit of the elite. This form of resource management eventually evolved into modern game laws, which aim to balance human recreation with wildlife conservation. Today, we have hunting seasons and licenses, ensuring that deer and other game aren't hunted into oblivion. A lesson learned from those days when the only thing stopping a deer from extinction was the occasional royal decree. But let's not sugarcoat it. Medieval hunting laws were less about conservation and more about control. It was about who got to play in the king's backyard and who got to watch from the sidelines. Yet, in a twist of historical irony, these self-serving laws became the unlikely ancestors of modern conservation efforts. The idea that certain areas should be reserved and managed for wildlife has its roots in those exclusive medieval hunting grounds. And what about those deer parks? They might have been medieval larders disguised as nature reserves, but they were also a precursor to our modern understanding of protected areas. Today, conservationists talk about maintaining biodiversity and ecological balance, but back then, the talk was all about keeping the royal pantry stocked. The difference is that now, we like to pretend we've got a loftier goal than just a good roast. Now, let's flip the coin and talk about the romantic myths surrounding medieval hunting. The image of the gallant knight riding through the forest in pursuit of noble prey is as compelling today as it was back then. It's a narrative that has survived the centuries, glossing over the mud, sweat, and social intrigue that truly define the hunt. This romanticism isn't just about nostalgia. It's about human nature's penchant for myth-making. We love a good story, and what's better than a tale of bravery and adventure in the wild? However, the reality was more about social climbing and political maneuvering than heroic quests. Yet these myths endure, influencing how we perceive hunting today. Modern hunters often invoke the spirit of the medieval chase, seeing themselves as part of a grand tradition. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's value in understanding hunting as part of our cultural heritage, but it's crucial to separate the wheat from the chaff. Recognizing the gritty realities of medieval hunts can offer insights into the complex social structures that shape them, reminding us that today's hunting practices are equally embedded in socio-political contexts. So, what can modern society learn from this history? For starters, the importance of sustainable practices. While medieval elites were more concerned with their next feast than the ecological impact of their hunts, the consequences of overhunting were clear. The depletion of game and the subsequent ecological ripple effects were early lessons in the importance of maintaining balance. Today, we carry forward these lessons in the form of regulated hunting seasons, conservation programs, and protected reserves. Moreover, understanding the historical context of hunting can help us appreciate the need for inclusive conservation strategies that consider not just wildlife, but also the people who live alongside it. The medieval model of exclusive rights and privilege doesn't work in a world where conservation needs to be a collective effort, involving communities, governments, and individuals. In the end, the legacy of medieval hunting is a tapestry of contradictions, a blend of control and chaos, conservation and consumption, myth and reality. The forests may have reclaimed their secrets, but the stories they inspired are etched into our cultural consciousness. As we move forward, it's worth remembering that history isn't just a series of dates and events, but a complex web of human desires and ambitions, each leaving a mark on the world. So, the next time you find yourself wandering through a park or a forest, take a moment to reflect on the intricate dance of power and politics that once unfolded beneath the branches. Consider how far we've come and how much we've learned, even if sometimes it feels like we're still wandering the medieval woods. And remember, whether you're a modern conservationist or just a weekend hiker, you're part of a story that began centuries ago when kings and nobles turned the hunt into a Game of Thrones, long before HBO made it cool. In the bustling city of Athens, circa 470 BCE, a baby named Socrates entered the world. His arrival in a household where chisels and stone met herbs and childbirth set the stage for a life that would chisel away at ignorance and deliver the labor of thought. His father, Socrates, was a stonemason, which might explain Socrates' penchant for chipping away at arguments. Meanwhile, his mother, Phoenicia, a midwife, perhaps inspired his later claim to be a midwife of ideas. Talk about a family business that really knew how to rock and roll, or at least roll rocks. Athens in those days was the kind of place that would give today's political analysts a heart attack. Democracy was the name of the game, but with more drama than a season finale of a reality TV show. Citizens, which meant free men with Athenian parents, gathered in the Phoenix, a rocky hill where they'd hash out decisions that laid the foundations of Western political thought. Meanwhile, women, slaves, and foreigners who made up the majority were left to watch this democracy from the sidelines, or rather from their homes. Socrates grew up amidst this cacophony, and it's no wonder he turned out to be a bit of an oddball. Picture this, a man who supposedly resembled a satyr, with bulging eyes and a snub nose, wandering around Athens barefoot. Yes, barefoot. Today, we might call him eccentric. Back then, he was just the guy who looked like he'd lost a bet with a pair of sandals. But his peculiar appearance didn't stop him from developing a reputation for asking the kind of questions that leave people staring into their wine goblets, rethinking life choices. As a young man, Socrates had his fair share of Athenian education, which meant learning the basics of literature, music, and gymnastics. This was a time when the gym wasn't just for getting swole. It was considered vital for developing a sound body to house a sound mind. So there was Socrates, likely running laps and playing the lyre, perhaps contemplating if running in circles was a metaphor for life. But what really set him apart was his insatiable curiosity. You know, that one friend who never stops asking, why? Socrates was that friend, on a never-ending quest to dissect the world around him. This was a city teeming with sophists, teachers of wisdom who charged hefty fees to teach the art of persuasion. Socrates, however, wasn't in it for the drachmas. He was in it for the truth, or at least his relentless pursuit of it. Athens itself was a character as colorful as any mythological figure. It was a city where the sea breeze carried the scent of olive oil and ambition, where philosophers and playwrights roamed the agora, debating everything from the cosmos to the best way to roast lamb. The city, with its beautiful chaos and contradictions, was the perfect backdrop for a man who thrived on asking uncomfortable questions. Socrates would have been surrounded by the sights and sounds of a city both ancient and ahead of its time. The Parthenon was under construction, an architectural marvel that would take nearly 15 years to complete. It was a city in flux, grappling with its newfound identity as a beacon of democracy while still very much tied to its past. The Peloponnesian War loomed on the horizon, a conflict that would stretch over 27 years and reshape the Greek world. Despite his humble beginnings, Socrates' life was anything but ordinary. He served as a hoplite, a heavily armed foot soldier, during the Peloponnesian War. Imagine our barefoot philosopher donning armor and marching into battle. It's like picturing Einstein as a linebacker, passable, but not quite the image that comes to mind first. Yet, Socrates proved himself to be a brave soldier, reportedly saving the life of Alcibiades, a fellow Athenian general and all-around rabble-rouser. Fast forward to Socrates in his prime, and you see a man who has fully embraced the role of Athens' philosophical gadfly. He spent his days engaging with citizens in the Agora, a place that functioned as the city's social, political, and economic hub. Here, he'd roam, pestering Athenians with questions that peeled back the layers of their assumptions. It's like he was the original social media troll, but with noble intentions and a distinct lack of hashtags. Despite his growing influence, Socrates never wrote a word. His teachings were passed down through his students, most famously Plato, who captured the essence of Socratic dialogue in his writings. This might explain why Socrates comes across as the protagonist in Plato's works, even if he occasionally sounds like he's a few olives short of a full salad. The dialogues show Socrates at his best and worst, questioning the nature of knowledge, justice, and virtue. But before we get into that, let's not forget the man himself. Socrates' lifestyle was as minimalist as his footwear. He lived modestly, often seen wearing the same threadbare cloak, and he never seemed too bothered by material wealth. It's as if he took Marie Kondo's advice several millennia before she did. Except for him, joy came from relentless inquiry, not tidying up. Socrates' reputation grew, and so did his list of admirers and detractors. His method of questioning, known as elenchus, involved breaking down arguments to expose contradictions. This made him both revered and reviled. To some, he was a hero of critical thinking. To others, a nuisance who needed to mind his own business. Imagine someone questioning your life choices every time you try to buy a loaf of bread. Not exactly a recipe for popularity. So, here's Socrates, a man of paradoxes in a city of contradictions. He was a soldier who disdained material wealth, a thinker who never wrote down his thoughts, and a philosopher who valued ignorance as the first step toward wisdom. His legacy would be both monumental and controversial, setting the stage for what would become one of history's most famous trials. But before the hemlock, there was the man, the philosopher who wandered the streets of Athens, asking questions and refusing to accept easy answers. Socrates, the barefoot thinker, was not just a product of his time, but a timeless figure, forever challenging us to question the world and our place in it. Socrates, the barefoot thinker, was not just a product of his time, but a timeless figure, forever challenging us to question the world and our place in it. As Socrates ambled through Athens, the city's bustling streets served as his open-air classroom, where he employed his infamous Socratic method to educate, or exasperate, those around him. Forget about a standardized curriculum or neat lesson plans. Socrates' approach was more akin to a brain-bending workout. His modus operandi, asking questions, lots of them, until you found yourself questioning not only your argument but your very existence. Picture this, Socrates, with his satyr-like visage, locking eyes with an unsuspecting Athenian. He'd start with a seemingly innocent question, like, what is virtue? By the end of the conversation, the poor soul would be left pondering the nature of the soul, the essence of goodness, and whether they had left the stove on. It was a kind of intellectual stripping down, layer by layer, until all that remained was a pile of raw ideas and a very confused interlocutor. Critics might say he was a philosophical troll, but Socrates saw himself as a gadfly, buzzing around Athens and keeping the city awake to its own ignorance. Now, let's talk about his career, or the lack thereof. In today's terms, Socrates was the quintessential freelancer, but unlike the ones who deliver artisanal lattes or trendy graphic designs, his service was free of charge. No drachmas exchanged hands when Socrates engaged you in dialogue. He was in it for the thrill of the chase, not the coin. This lack of financial ambition was both endearing and perplexing. While the sophists were cashing in on their rhetorical prowess, Socrates was the guy at the party who'd corner you with existential questions while everyone else was discussing the latest chariot race. However, this method of his wasn't just an intellectual pastime. It was a way of life. Socrates believed that the unexamined life wasn't worth living, a sentiment that might sound like bumper sticker wisdom today, but was revolutionary back then. He became a fixture in the Agora, the heart of Athenian public life, where merchants peddled goods and citizens debated politics. It was an ideal stage for Socrates to perform his dialectical dance, challenging Athenians to think a little deeper, question a little harder, and maybe, just maybe, catch a glimpse of truth. But not everyone appreciated Socrates' relentless quest for truth. Fast forward to 399 BCE, and we find our philosopher in a scenario as absurd as it was tragic. The infamous trial. Athens, having recently suffered the twin blows of losing the Peloponnesian War and enduring a brief but brutal oligarchic coup, was in a state of political and social upheaval. Itching for scapegoats, the city fixed its gaze on Socrates, who seemed to embody the contradictions and tensions bubbling under the surface of Athenian society. The charges leveled against him, corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety. Sounds serious, right? But peel back the layers, and you find a trial that was less about justice and more about settling scores. Socrates had amassed quite a few enemies over the years. His method of cross-examining people until their beliefs crumbled didn't exactly win him a fan club among the city's elite. And the youth he was supposedly corrupting. Many were from influential families, including the notorious Alcibiades, whose flamboyant antics were enough to make any parent wish their child had chosen a less controversial mentor. The trial itself was a spectacle that could rival a modern-day courtroom drama. Socrates, ever the contrarian, refused to play the role of the penitent defendant. Instead of a tearful plea, he offered a defense that was part philosophical treatise, part stand-up routine. When asked how he should be punished, he cheekily suggested he be rewarded with free meals for life, as if he were a victorious Olympic athlete rather than a man on trial for his life. It was a bold move, one that might have worked in a comedy club but fell flat with his judges. 500 male citizens, chosen by lot, who were more interested in order than oratory. Despite, or perhaps because of, his audacious defense, the jury found him guilty. By a margin of just 30 votes, Socrates was condemned to death. It's worth noting that the Athenian judicial system was more like a reality TV show than a court of law, with decisions swayed by rhetoric and popularity rather than evidence. Socrates' fate, sealed by a mixture of political vendetta and societal fear, was to drink hemlock, a poison that would end his life but cement his legacy. In the end, Socrates became a martyr for philosophy, a symbol of the tension between individual thought and societal conformity. His trial highlighted the fragility of Athenian democracy, a system that prided itself on free speech, yet couldn't tolerate a voice that challenged its core assumptions. The charges of corrupting the youth and impiety were less about actual crimes and more about the perceived threat Socrates posed to the status quo. And what of those youth? They went on to shape the future of philosophy, led by Plato, who would become one of history's most celebrated thinkers. Socrates' method, though it cost him his life, endured, becoming a cornerstone of Western philosophy. His legacy is a reminder that questioning authority can be dangerous, but it is also essential for progress. The trial of Socrates was a cautionary tale of how democracies can turn on their own citizens when fear and uncertainty cloud judgment. Yet Socrates' story doesn't end with his death. His ideas lived on, carried forward by his students, who chronicled his teachings for future generations. Plato's dialogues immortalized Socrates as a philosophical hero, a man willing to die for his beliefs. But let's not romanticize too much. Socrates was also a man who could be infuriatingly stubborn, gleefully contrarian, and unapologetically questioning to the very end. As we leave Socrates in the clutches of history, remember that he was more than a philosopher. He was a provocateur, a challenger of norms, a stirrer of parts. His life was a testament to the power of questions, the kind that unsettle, provoke, and ultimately illuminate. In Athens, a city that was simultaneously the cradle of democracy and the scene of his undoing, Socrates remains an enigmatic figure, a man whose life and death continue to provoke debate and inspire wonder. But hold that thought, because there's more to unravel in the next installment of our journey through Socratic drama and philosophical intrigue. For now, let's leave our barefoot sage in the annals of history, a reminder that the quest for truth is rarely easy, often uncomfortable, but always essential. But let's not close the book on Socrates just yet. There's a whole Greek drama of relationships and influence unfolding around him, with a cast of characters that would make any soap opera envious. For starters, we have Plato, the student who turned Socrates' dialogues into the stuff of philosophical legend. Plato was like the ultimate fanboy who turned his mentor's challenging questions into a series of writings that would shape Western thought. If Socrates was the frontman, Plato was the roadie who ensured the show went on long after the curtain fell. Plato wasn't just any student, though. He was from one of Athens' most distinguished families, a background that gave him the social cred to spread Socratic philosophy like wildfire. When Socrates was busy being the philosophical gadfly, Plato was soaking it all up, later to distill these encounters into dialogues that read like ancient soap operas with a side of enlightenment. And let's not forget the Academy, founded by Plato. This was the Ivy League of the ancient world, minus the hefty tuition fees, but with a much better toga game. Now, if Plato was the disciple who idolized Socrates, Aristophanes was the guy who threw tomatoes from the back row. Aristophanes, the playwright, took a more, shall we say, comedic approach to Socrates' philosophical antics. His play, The Clouds, famously lampooned Socrates, portraying him as a head-in-the-clouds thinker who could pontificate his way out of a paper bag, but couldn't hold down a dinner bill. Aristophanes painted Socrates as the kind of guy who'd try to pay for dinner with a philosophical debate instead of drachmas. In one scene, Socrates is depicted as floating in a basket to better observe the heavens, a metaphor for perhaps how detached from earthly concerns he seemed to some. And let's talk about that infamous dinner bill anecdote. Rumor has it Socrates once managed to weasel out of paying his share by launching into such a mind-bending discussion about the nature of justice and fairness that his fellow diners forgot what they were arguing about in the first place. Imagine trying to settle up after a meal and ending up with a lecture on moral philosophy instead. Genius, or just really annoying? You decide. Socrates' influence didn't stop at humor or philosophy classes. His circle of followers included other notables like Xenophon, the soldier historian who gave us another perspective on Socratic thought. Unlike the more exalted accounts from Plato, Xenophon's writings offer a glimpse of Socrates as a practical thinker, someone who could engage in philosophical musings while probably teaching you how to tie your sandals properly for battle. Xenophon's Socrates was less the ethereal philosopher and more the pragmatic mentor, someone who could inspire soldiers and scholars alike. But for every admirer, there was also a critic. Socrates' unyielding questioning made him a bit like that one uncle at family gatherings who insists on discussing politics and religion at the dinner table. It was a love-hate relationship with the Athenian public. On one hand, his method of dialogue, relentlessly probing questions designed to expose ignorance, was revolutionary. On the other, it was also the kind of thing that could make you want to pull your hair out if you were on the receiving end. So, was Socrates a genius, or just really annoying? The answer might be both. He was the kind of thinker who could make you question everything, including whether you even wanted to keep hanging out with him. His relentless pursuit of truth was both his charm and his curse, a quality that inspired deep admiration and equal frustration. In a world that was still grappling with the concept of democracy, Socrates' approach was a double-edged sword, cutting through ignorance but also slicing into the comfort of accepted norms. And what about his legacy? Socrates set in motion a philosophical lineage that would stretch far beyond Athens. His students, particularly Plato, carried the torch forward, influencing generations of thinkers. This was more than just a passing of ideas. It was a philosophical revolution that laid down the foundations for Western thought. Through Plato's dialogues, Socrates became not just a man but a myth, a symbol of the relentless quest for truth. Yet, the Socratic legacy wasn't just an academic exercise. It became a living tradition, a way of thinking that encouraged questioning and skepticism. The Socratic method, as it came to be known, became a staple of education, a tool for teaching critical thinking. It was as if Socrates had handed the world a philosophical toolkit, one that could be used to dismantle preconceptions and build new ideas. As we leave this part of the story, Socrates stands as a figure as complex as the questions he posed. He was a man who could challenge the very fabric of society with nothing more than his words, a testament to the power of ideas. His relationships with figures like Plato and Aristophanes, his influence on students, and his lasting legacy all paint a picture of a man whose impact was as profound as it was contentious. In the end, Socrates was a philosopher who lived by his principles, even when it cost him dearly. His life was a testament to the courage of conviction and the power of questions. His story is far from over, as the next chapter of history will reveal even more about the ripples he set in motion. For now, we leave our tale of Socratic drama and intrigue with a lingering question, one that Socrates himself might appreciate. Are we any closer to the truth, or have we simply found better questions to ask? Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world Socrates shaped, one question at a time. And so, as we ponder the cosmic question of whether Socrates brought us closer to truth or just better questions, let's dive into the ripples his ideas continued to make after his untimely exit. The truth is, Socrates' legacy wasn't just a ripple, it was a full-blown tsunami that swept through the annals of Western thought. His death might have been intended as a silencing act by Athens, but instead it turned up the volume on his teachings, echoing through the corridors of philosophy for millennia. Now, let's dig into the post-mortem impact of our barefoot philosopher. Picture this: a world where Socrates' ideas have become the intellectual currency of the realm, no silver drachmas needed. His disciples, like Plato and Xenophon, carried the torch, ensuring that his method of relentless questioning would become a foundational pillar of Western education. Think of it as the original critical thinking course, minus the PowerPoint slides and college credits. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, went on to establish the academy around 387 BCE, a place where minds could meet and clash in the pursuit of wisdom. The academy was less about ivy-covered walls and more about the open exchange of ideas. It became a breeding ground for philosophical thought, nurturing figures like Aristotle, who would later tutor Alexander the Great. Yes, that Alexander, conqueror of worlds, pupil of philosophers. Talk about a domino effect. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of philosophical legacy without addressing the hemlock in the room. Socrates' stoic acceptance of his fate has been the stuff of legend, thanks largely to Plato's vivid portrayal. According to the Phaedo, Socrates drank the hemlock with a calm demeanor, engaging in philosophical dialogue until his last breath, a scene that reads more like a movie script than a courtroom drama. But was it truly a smile on his face, or was Plato giving his mentor the ancient world's equivalent of a PR glow-up? Socrates' actual demeanor in his final moments remains a mystery wrapped in a riddle, hidden in an enigma. There are no selfies or live tweets to confirm it, only the narratives passed down by those who revered him. While Plato presents a serene picture, other accounts suggest that Socrates' defiance may have been tinged with the human fear of mortality. But whether he faced death with a grin or a grimace, one thing is certain. His execution was a dramatic demonstration of his commitment to his beliefs, a philosophical mic drop that would resonate for centuries. Now, let's tackle the practical side of Socratic wisdom. How to live a virtuous life when your wallet is emptier than a philosopher's stomach. Socrates was the original minimalist avant la lettre. Forget about those modern decluttering gurus. Socrates was living the simple life before it was trendy. His teachings emphasized virtue over wealth, wisdom over worldly possessions. Imagine Socrates turning up his nose at a designer toga, opting instead for his trusty old cloak that could probably tell its own stories if it weren't so threadbare. Socrates' views on virtue and wealth were as radical then as they are now. In a society where status was often measured by the weight of one's purse, Socrates preached that true wealth lay in the richness of one's soul. He believed that a virtuous life was its own reward, a sentiment that might leave today's financial advisors clutching their spreadsheets in horror. But his message had a timeless appeal. Money might buy you a nice house, but it won't buy you a happy life. In fact, Socrates might argue that too much focus on material wealth could actually clutter the path to true wisdom, like trying to navigate a philosophical maze while carrying a suitcase full of gold. His teachings on virtue weren't just abstract musings, either. Socrates was all about practical application, how to live ethically even when you couldn't afford the fluffier side of life. He was the kind of guy who could turn a simple walk in the marketplace into a lesson on humility and self-restraint. While Athens was a city obsessed with the new and the shiny, Socrates offered a counterculture perspective, emphasizing the value of self-knowledge and temperance. His philosophy was like the antidote to consumerism, a reminder that the most valuable pursuits often can't be measured in material terms. As we explore the lasting influence of Socrates, it's important to recognize the duality of his legacy. On one hand, there's the romanticized image of the noble philosopher, steadfast and unyielding even in the face of death. On the other, there's the reality of a man whose methods were as frustrating as they were enlightening, a provocateur whose insistence on questioning everything could drive you mad just as easily as it could inspire you. Socrates' post-mortem influence was like a philosophical relay race, with each generation passing the baton of his teachings to the next. The Renaissance rekindled an interest in his ideas, as humanists looked to the ancients for inspiration in their quest for knowledge. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and you'll find Socratic thought underpinning the very foundations of modern rationalism. His insistence on reason and inquiry became the bedrock for scientific exploration and democratic principles. But even as we celebrate the intellectual giant, let's not ignore the very human Socrates. who walked the streets of Athens barefoot, challenging the status quo with every step. He was the everyman philosopher, grounded yet profound, whose teachings continue to challenge us to this day. In a world that often prizes certainty and simplicity, Socrates reminds us of the power of complexity and doubt. So, what can we learn from Socrates as we navigate our own lives in a world that's both radically different and eerily similar to his? Perhaps it's the courage to ask uncomfortable questions, to challenge our own assumptions, and to seek truth beyond appearances. Whether you're a student of philosophy or just someone trying to make sense of the chaos, Socrates offers a timeless guide. Question everything, embrace uncertainty, and never stop seeking wisdom. As we linger on the legacy of this remarkable thinker, let's remember that Socrates wasn't just a philosopher. He was a pioneer of the mind, a relentless seeker of truth in a world full of half-truths. His life and ideas continue to provoke, inspire, and challenge us, urging us to look beyond the surface and dig deeper into the essence of what it means to be human. The story of Socrates is far from over, with more questions to explore and lessons to uncover. So stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more intrigue in the world of ancient wisdom. As we dive back into the Socratic whirlpool of wisdom and philosophical hijinks, let's reflect on why this ancient philosopher still looms large in our modern conscience. Socrates, the man who didn't write a single word, somehow etched his presence into the very bedrock of Western thought. And for someone who lived over 400 years ago, he's doing a pretty good job of keeping up with the times. His legacy, it's a curious blend of intellectual rigor and existential mischief that continues to resonate in our classrooms, boardrooms, and even meme culture. Let's start with education, where Socrates is the OG of critical thinking. His method of incessant questioning, now immortalized as the Socratic method, has become a cornerstone of modern pedagogy. Law schools, in particular, have adopted this technique like it's a secret weapon in their arsenal. Picture a lecture hall where a professor, channeling their inner Socrates, peppers students with questions, poking holes in their arguments faster than a toddler can poke holes in a screen door. It's an exercise in humility and rigor, designed to peel back the layers of assumption and reveal the raw, sometimes uncomfortable, core of truth. But Socrates' influence doesn't stop at the classroom door. His legacy is a clarion call for intellectual honesty and the courage to question authority. In today's world, where information is a tap away and misinformation is a close cousin, the ability to think critically is more valuable than ever. Socrates would likely be a fan of the meme culture. After all, memes are just pithy vehicles for conveying complex ideas quickly. Imagine him scrolling through his smartphone, chuckling at a meme that reads, "I used to think I was indecisive, but now I'm not so sure." It's the kind of self-reflective humor that Socrates would appreciate, a nod to the eternal dance between certainty and doubt. Yet, Socrates' relevance today isn't just about fostering critical thinking, it's about challenging the status quo. In a world where questioning authority has become both a meme and a movement, Socrates stands as the original rebel with a cause. He championed the idea that questioning isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. Whether it's political ideologies or social norms, Socrates reminds us that it's not only okay to ask why, but necessary. In fact, he'd probably roll his eyes at any ideology that demands blind allegiance, reminding us that the unexamined life is indeed not worth living. Now, let's sprinkle in some Socratic quotes to drive home the point. Socrates had a knack for encapsulating profound truths in a few choice words. Take, for instance, "An unexamined life is not worth living." It's the kind of phrase that can fuel 1,000 existential crises or inspire a life of introspection. And then there's the classic, "I know that I know nothing." It's not just a statement of humility, it's an invitation to embrace the unknown and revel in the pursuit of knowledge. In a universe of infinite questions, Socrates teaches us to find comfort in uncertainty, to dance on the edge of knowledge without falling into the pit of ignorance. But let's not get too swept away in the romanticism of Socratic wisdom without addressing the reality of his time. Athens was a city in turmoil, grappling with the aftermath of war and political upheaval. Socrates' trial was a stark reminder of the fragile balance between democracy and mob rule. The charges against him, corrupting the youth and impiety, were as much about silencing dissent as they were about any real threat. Socrates, with his penchant for exposing uncomfortable truths, was simply too dangerous for a city eager to maintain order amidst chaos. In the end, Socrates' legacy is a blend of myth and reality. He was a man who lived his principles, even when faced with death. His willingness to challenge accepted norms, to question everything and everyone, made him a lightning rod for controversy and admiration. And while his execution was meant to silence him, it instead amplified his voice, turning his life into a timeless lesson on the power of questions and the courage to seek truth. As we wrap up our philosophical journey with Socrates, let's consider his enduring significance. In a world that's constantly changing, where every day brings new challenges and opportunities, Socrates offers a timeless guide. Embrace the unknown, question with abandon, and never stop seeking wisdom. In the words of the man himself, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. It's a humbling admission, a reminder that learning is a lifelong journey, and that the pursuit of truth is a dance, not a destination. So, as you navigate the complexities of modern life, channel your inner Socrates. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and above all, keep an open mind. Whether you're debating the merits of pineapple on pizza or pondering the mysteries of the universe, remember that the quest for knowledge is never-ending, and that's the beauty of it. Socrates may have walked the streets of Athens barefoot, but his footsteps continue to guide us, reminding us that in the grand tapestry of history, the wisest path is the one that leads us to question, explore, and discover anew. High up in the Andes, where the air is thin and the landscape looks like it's been chiseled by the hand of an over-ambitious god, the Inca Empire once sprawled across a staggering 500 miles. That's right. This wasn't some cozy little kingdom. This was an empire that laughed in the face of logistical nightmares. The Incas managed a domain that stretched from what's now Ecuador all the way down to Chile. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's like ruling a land from New York City to Los Angeles, but with a lot more llamas and a lot less Wi-Fi. The Inca knack for administration was nothing short of miraculous. We're talking about an empire that rose to prominence in the 15th century, a time when Europe was still trying to figure out how to wash regularly. But the Incas, they were beyond that. They had systems in place that would make even an MBA blush with inadequacy. This was a civilization that kept track of everything from population data to military resources using quippers, an ingenious method employing a series of knots on cords. Think of quippers as the original cloud storage, but with more strings attached. Imagine balancing an empire's books with no written language. It's like doing your taxes with interpretive dance. The Inca Empire was founded on myth as much as on stone and mortar. Enter the legendary figures of Manco Capac and Mama Arclo. According to Inca lore, these two were sent by the sun god Inti himself to establish civilization. They emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca, like the world's most ambitious reality TV contestants, tasked with a divine mission to bring order and enlightenment to humanity. Now, sure, the story has a nice touch of drama and celestial approval, but let's not forget the gritty reality of empire building. It takes more than divine fairy tales to keep the wheels of governance turning. Speaking of wheels, the Incas didn't have them. That's right, no wheels. Despite this, they built an intricate network of roads that would make any Roman engineer weep with envy. Over 24,000 miles of roads snaked through the empire, allowing for rapid movement of armies and messengers. In a world without horses, communication was handled by chasquis, fleet-footed runners who dashed across the empire like human Wi-Fi routers. They relayed messages faster than you could say Inca Express, carrying quippers and verbal messages across the mountainous terrain. The Inca civilization was a marvel of centralized control. Their strategy was as much about assimilation as it was about conquest. When they absorbed a new tribe or region, they didn't just conquer, they integrated. Local leaders were often allowed to keep their positions, as long as they pledged allegiance to the Sapa Inca, the empire's sovereign, whose word was considered law. Picture a benevolent dictatorship with a side of cultural exchange, and you've got a rough idea. It's tempting to romanticize the Inca Empire as a utopian society, but let's not get carried away. Sure, they had a sophisticated welfare system. Those unable to work were supported by the state, a concept that would make even modern social democracies nod in respect. But the flip side of this centralized control was, well, control. The Incas had a knack for keeping everyone in line, and dissent was not exactly encouraged. In terms of economics, the Incas operated on a system that would baffle today's economists. No money. Instead, they relied on a system of labor tax known as mida, where citizens owed work to the empire. This wasn't just a few hours of community service. It was a full-on obligation to contribute to state projects like building roads, temples, or agricultural terraces. Think of it as working for exposure, but the exposure is feeding your entire civilization. The Inca Empire's rise was as rapid as it was impressive, yet its success was built on a precarious balance of power and geography. Nestled among the Andes, they turned a rugged landscape into a strategic advantage. Terraced agriculture transformed steep mountainsides into fertile land, allowing them to cultivate crops like potatoes and maize, staple foods that sustained their massive population. The Incas were the original terrace farmers, turning vertical challenges into horizontal abundance. All these feats of administration and engineering, combined with a cultural ethos rooted in myth and divine mandate, set the stage for one of the most remarkable empires the world has ever seen. But as with all great stories, the real drama lies not just in the rise, but in the fall, and that, my friends, is a tale for another day. If the Incas had a secret sauce for empire building, it was their ability to make the Andes work for them. Picture this, a civilization staring at intimidating mountain slopes and thinking, challenge accepted. Their solution, terrace farming. The Incas turned those daunting vertical landscapes into tiered agricultural marvels. Each terrace was like a step in a giant staircase leading to food security. By cutting into the mountainsides, they created flat plots where they could grow crops like potatoes, quinoa, and maize. These terraces weren't just about maximizing space. They were engineering masterpieces that prevented soil erosion and managed irrigation. Water was channeled through intricate networks, demonstrating a level of agricultural savvy that would make even modern hydrologists nod in approval. Now, let's talk about the real MVP of the Andes, the llama. These woolly wonders were the Incas' transportation solution long before Uber considered going public. Llamas were the backbone of Inca logistics, carrying goods over treacherous mountain paths in caravans that could rival a New York City traffic jam. But unlike cars, llamas don't need gas, just a good patch of grass. Each llama could carry about 50 to 75 pounds, which might not sound like much, but when you have a herd moving in sync, you've got yourself an Andean freight train. They transported everything from food and textiles to precious metals, with their padded feet treading lightly on the rugged terrain, ensuring that the Inca economy kept humming along. Speaking of economy, the Incas had a refreshingly different take on wealth. Forget about jingling coins in your pocket. The Incas were all about labor, or as they called it, mida. This wasn't your casual gig economy hustle. It was a system where every citizen was expected to contribute labor to state projects. Picture an empire running on the fuel of collective sweat equity. The mida system wasn't just about building things. It was a tool for social cohesion and control. It tied people to the empire, ensuring that everyone had a stake in the monumental projects that defined Inca society, from roads to temples. But let's not romanticize it too much. The mida was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it fostered a sense of unity and purpose. On the other, it was an instrument of control. Refusal to participate was not an option unless you fancied becoming familiar with the empire's less pleasant enforcement methods. Imagine being told that your civic duty involved a few months of backbreaking labor high in the Andes. Not exactly a holiday, but this was how the Incas ensured that their infrastructure dreams became reality. While the rest of the world was busy minting coins and counting change, the Incas embraced a more reciprocal approach to economics. Their system was less about cash flow and more about the flow of goods and services. Think of it as a barter economy on steroids, where reciprocity was the currency of the realm. If you contributed to a community project, you could expect the community to have your back in times of need. It was a social safety net woven into the fabric of daily life, long before the concept of social security numbers and taxes. In this land of no money, prestige and power were measured by what you could give rather than what you could hoard. Redistribution was the name of the game, with the Sapa Inca at the top, acting as the ultimate benefactor. Surplus goods were stored in state-run warehouses, ensuring that resources could be distributed where they were needed most. This wasn't just charity, it was strategic stockpiling, ensuring that even in lean times, the empire could keep the wheels of production turning. It's easy to look back and think of the Inca economy as idyllic, but let's not kid ourselves. The system required a delicate balance of production and distribution, and it was not without its failures. The Inca rulers had to be adept at managing resources and people, maintaining a careful balance between generosity and authority. The moment that balance tipped, the system risked collapse, a reality that would become all too apparent in the years to come. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of this ancient empire, one thing becomes clear. The Incas were masters of turning adversity into opportunity, whether it was coaxing crops from the mountainsides or creating a thriving economy without a single coin. Their innovations were driven by necessity and ingenuity. So, as we continue to unravel the threads of their history, remember that behind the myths and stonework lies a story of human resilience and creativity, one that still echoes in the Andes today. So, having laid the groundwork for this empire of paradoxes, let's dive into the glitzy yet gritty world of Inca society. Imagine a social hierarchy so well-defined could put a corporate org chart to shame. At the top sat the Sapa Inca, the granddaddy of all things Inca, revered as a living deity. We're talking about a guy who had more divine clout than Elvis had rhinestones. But unlike a rock star, the Sapa Inca didn't just strut around in sequined jumpsuits. He was seen as the direct descendant of Intai, the sun god, which is quite the lineage perk when you're trying to keep an empire glued together across treacherous mountain ranges. Now, the Sapa Inca wasn't just a figurehead. He wielded real power. Picture a CEO who also moonlights as a high priest and a military general. His word was law, his whims were gospel, and his image was everywhere. Think of him as the ultimate brand ambassador for the divine right of kings. But let's not pretend this was a one-man show. The Inca Empire was supported by a robust nobility, a class of people who were as crucial to the empire's functioning as the support beams in a skyscraper. These nobles, called the Inca, were of royal blood and were tasked with governing provinces, leading armies, and ensuring the empire's policies were followed. They were the middle management to the Sapa Inca's CEO, keeping the empire's gears turning smoothly. But don't picture a bunch of dour bureaucrats in suits. These nobles were the life of the party, quite literally. They played key roles in the elaborate religious festivals that were as much about social cohesion as they were about worship. Speaking of festivals, the Incas knew how to throw a bash. Their religious ceremonies were like Coachella, but with more sacrifices and fewer flower crowns. These events were designed to reinforce the social order and remind everyone of the divine favor that supposedly kept the empire thriving. The Inti Raymi festival was the crown jewel of Inca celebrations, held in honor of the sun god Inti. Think of it as Thanksgiving, New Year's, and the 4th of July rolled into one, with a dash of celestial reverence. It was a time when the nobility donned their finest attire, which probably had more gold than a modern hip-hop video. But here comes the myth-busting segment of today's program. The idea that the Incas were a model of egalitarianism. Sure, the concept of a welfare system sounds progressive, but let's peel back the gold leaf. The society was rigidly stratified, with the Sapa Inca and his nobles living in opulence while the lower classes toiled away. The empire's economic backbone was the Ailu, or extended family groups, which were the basic units of rural society. These groups were responsible for farming, herding, and fulfilling their meager obligations. So while the Ailu system fostered a sense of community and mutual support, it also ensured that everyone knew their place. The Incas had their version of a social ladder, and if you were born at the bottom, chances were you weren't climbing too high. The empire's stability depended on everyone playing their assigned roles, and the nobility made sure the status quo was maintained. This wasn't a society where you could easily change your stars. More often than not, you were stuck with the hand you were dealt. So while the Inca narrative often paints a picture of harmonious living, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, controlled. Religion was the glue that held the empire together, with the Sapa Inca as the high priest of this divine order. The Inca pantheon was vast, but Inti, the sun god, was the headliner. Temples dedicated to Inti and other deities dotted the landscape, serving as both religious centers and symbols of state power. The Coricancha, or the Temple of the Sun, in Cusco was the Vatican of the Inca world, a dazzling structure whose walls were literally covered in gold. It was a place where the spiritual and the political mingled, much like a modern-day power lunch, but with more chanting and less small talk. These temples were more than just places of worship. They were hubs of economic activity. Priests and priestesses managed lands and resources, ensuring that the gods were appeased and the people were fed. The lines between religion and politics were as blurred as a late-night text message, with both spheres reinforcing each other. Festivals and rituals were meticulously planned, serving not just as religious observances, but as demonstrations of the empire's wealth and power. They were the ultimate PR campaigns, reminding everyone, from the lowliest farmer to the haughtiest noble, of the divine mandate that justified the Sapa Inca's rule. But let's not forget the human element. Behind the gold and pageantry were real people, living complex lives in a society that demanded conformity. The Inca civilization was a tapestry of diverse cultures and languages, brought together under one banner. The empire's strength lay in its ability to assimilate these different groups, but this assimilation often came at the cost of individual identity. The pressure to conform was immense, and those who resisted found themselves facing the empire's less-than-gentle persuasion techniques. In the Inca worldview, the cosmos was a stage, and everyone had a role to play. But unlike a Hollywood blockbuster, there were no auditions for a better part. The Sapa Inca and his nobles were the stars of this show, while the rest of society served as the supporting cast. It's easy to romanticize the Inca Empire as a well-oiled machine, but this machine ran on a fuel mix of divine right, social stratification, and the unyielding expectation of conformity. As we pull back the curtain on this ancient empire, it becomes clear that the Incas were masters of managing appearances. They created a society that seemed harmonious and egalitarian, but beneath the surface was a complex web of power dynamics and social control. The festivals and rituals were a means of reinforcing the social order, ensuring that everyone knew their place in the cosmic hierarchy. This was a world where religion, politics, and economics were intertwined, each reinforcing the other in a delicate balance. So, as we continue to explore the Inca Empire, remember that behind the myths and monuments were real people navigating a world of divine mandates and earthly obligations. The Incas may have been masters of empire building, but their legacy is a reminder that even the most impressive civilizations are built on the backs of those who often go unseen. As we move forward, let's keep in mind that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the stories we uncover. Stay tuned, because the Inca saga is far from over. So, as we journey deeper into the heart of the Inca Empire, let's shift our gaze from the celestial drama of divine rulers and festivals to the literal foundations of their greatness, their architecture and engineering feats. It's time to talk about Machu Picchu, that crown jewel of the Andes, and bust some myths while we're at it. First off, let's clear up the lost city narrative that has given Machu Picchu an air of mysterious abandonment. Contrary to popular belief, this wasn't some forgotten relic languishing in the jungle until Hiram Bingham discovered it in 1911. Cue the eye roll. Machu Picchu was never lost to the locals. They knew it was there all along. It was more like a well-kept secret, the kind of place you don't advertise on TripAdvisor. Built in the 15th century, Machu Picchu served as a royal estate for Pachacuti, the Inca emperor who had a penchant for grand designs. Think of it as his summer home, a mountaintop retreat with views that could make Instagram influencers weep. Nestled at 970 feet above sea level, Machu Picchu is a testament to the Inca mastery of architectural ingenuity. It wasn't just about aesthetics. Every stone was carefully placed to withstand earthquakes, a common occurrence in this tectonically active region. Their technique, known as ashlar masonry, involved cutting stones so precisely that they fit together without mortar. The result, structures so stable they've withstood the test of time and tectonics. Now, for the numbers game. Machu Picchu covers about 592 hectares and features around 200 structures, from temples to terraces. And speaking of terraces, these weren't just for show. They were critical to the site's sustainability, preventing erosion and supporting agriculture. The Incas turned mountainsides into arable land, a feat that should earn them a spot in the Agricultural Engineering Hall of Fame, if such a thing existed. But let's take a moment to appreciate the real marvel, the road network connecting Machu Picchu to the rest of the empire. The Incas managed over 24,800 miles of roads. Yes, you heard right. Miles and miles of paths that crisscrossed the empire, from the arid coasts to the Amazon rainforest. And all of this without a single wheel. These roads were the arteries of the Inca state, crucial for moving armies, goods, and information. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of the internet, but with fewer cat memes and more llamas. These roads were no mere dirt paths, either. They included suspension bridges made from woven grass, stone steps carved into cliffs, and way stations known as tambos every 15 to 20 miles. Tambos were like the medieval version of rest stops, providing food and shelter to travelers. It wasn't just about getting from point A to B. It was about doing so efficiently and safely in a landscape that seemed determined to make travel as challenging as possible. Let's bust another myth while we're at it. The romantic notion that these roads were built solely for the glory of the empire. Sure, there was a bit of prestige involved, but the roads were primarily practical. They facilitated the movement of armies and ensured that the Sapa Inca could project power across his vast domain. And in a world without Amazon Prime, these roads were the logistical backbone of the Inca economy, ensuring that goods could flow between regions, from the high Andes to the coastal deserts. In comparing their infrastructure to modern systems, it's clear the Incas were ahead of their time. Their roads were designed with an eye for environmental sustainability long before it became a buzzword. They used local materials, adapted to the natural contours of the land, and required minimal maintenance. In contrast, today's infrastructure often bulldozes through nature, leaving a trail of ecological disruption. The Incas built with nature, not against it, a lesson modern engineers could take to heart. But before we get too misty-eyed about Inca infrastructure, let's not forget the quirks. While their roads were a marvel of engineering, they weren't exactly speed lanes. The absence of wheeled vehicles meant that everything moved at the pace of a llama caravan or a chasqui runner. Imagine commuting to work on foot over mountain passes. That's dedication or desperation. And then there's Machu Picchu itself, a site so remote that it was never finished. Yep, you heard right. Archaeologists believe the site was abandoned after Pachacuti's death, and the Spanish never found it. Lucky for us, because they had a talent for turning gold into cannon fodder. So, as we marvel at the stones and the stories they tell, remember that the Incas were architects of both stone and society. They built an empire on the back of ingenuity and labor, weaving a tapestry of roads and terraces that connected their world. It's a legacy that speaks to human creativity and resilience, a reminder that sometimes the most remarkable achievements arise from the most challenging landscapes. As we wrap up this segment of our Inca adventure, hold onto your hats, or your cholos, if you're feeling culturally adventurous, because there's more to this tale. We've only scratched the surface of their engineering prowess. Next, we'll dive into the systems and structures that kept the empire ticking, even amidst the chaos of conquest and change. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Incas is far from finished, and there are more mountains to climb and myths to debunk. But let's not get too swept up in the architectural marvels of the Incas, because looming on the horizon were the Spaniards, ready to flip the script in the most dramatic and tragic fashion. Cue Francisco Pizarro, the opportunistic conquistador with a knack for turning up uninvited to other people's parties. In 1532, Pizarro and his merry band of about 168 Spanish adventurers, yes, just 168, set sail for the Peru of their fevered gold dreams. Their arrival would mark the beginning of the end for the Inca Empire, a civilization that had weathered much but was woefully unprepared for what came next. Now, let's sprinkle in some harsh realities. By the time Pizarro's crew arrived, the Incas were already dealing with an uninvited guest of a different sort, smallpox. This disease had sauntered in from Central America, thanks to the Europeans, and was spreading faster than a viral meme. It ravaged the Inca population, including their leader Huayna Capac, leaving chaos in its wake. Imagine an empire the size of a continent, suddenly leaderless and stricken by a mysterious illness. It was a perfect storm of misfortune, and Pizarro sailed right into it like a vulture sensing its next meal. Adding to the internal strife was a good old family feud. The death of Huayna Capac set off a civil war between his sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, each vying for the top seat in this Andean game of thrones. Atahualpa eventually came out on top, but his victory was bittersweet, leaving the empire fractured and vulnerable, a scenario Pizarro capitalized on with the precision of a Wall Street trader eyeing a hostile takeover. Picture this. Atahualpa, fresh from his Civil War triumph, meets Pizarro in the town of Cajamarca. What followed was less of a negotiation and more of a historical heist. Pizarro invited Atahualpa to a friendly meetup, then ambushed him, capturing the Sapa Inca in a masterstroke of deceit. It was a bait-and switch that would go down in history as one of the most audacious Khans. Atahualpa, desperate to regain his freedom, offered a ransom that would make any pirate blush, enough gold to fill a room measuring 22 feet by 17 feet and twice that in silver. The Spanish, being the shrewd businessmen they were, took the loot but executed Atahualpa anyway, because, well, why not? This treachery set off a chain reaction that led to the rapid decline of the Inca Empire. With their leader gone and their society in disarray, the Incas found themselves facing an adversary wielding not just superior weaponry, but also a playbook full of ruthless tactics. Pizarro wasn't just a conquistador. He was the embodiment of opportunism. His conquest wasn't just about gold. It was about exploiting every weakness, every fracture in the Inca society. The fall of the Inca Empire is often painted as the tragic end of a noble civilization, but let's not ignore the complexities. This wasn't a simple story of good versus evil. Internal divisions, disease, and a failure to recognize the full threat posed by the Spanish all played their parts. It was a collapse born out of a multitude of factors, not a single swift blow. And yet, the romantic notion of a valiant last stand persists, because who doesn't love a good David and Goliath story, even if Goliath is packing steel and gunpowder? But let's pivot from the fall to the legacy. The Incas may have lost their empire, but their cultural impact endures. Modern Andean society still reflects the echoes of Inca ingenuity. From terrace farming techniques to the continued use of Quechua, the Inca language that stubbornly refuses to fade away, their legacy is alive and kicking. And those roads, still in use, a testament to their durability and the foresight of their builders. As we peel back the layers of myth, what emerges is a story of resilience. The Incas, despite the odds, left behind a cultural blueprint that informs Andean life to this day. Their agricultural practices, architectural styles, and even social structures continue to influence the region. Imagine walking through the Andes and still seeing remnants of Inca terraces, a silent reminder that even in defeat, their achievements were too monumental to be erased. Now, let's debunk one last myth, the notion of the Incas as a lost civilization. The truth is, they were never truly lost. The Inca spirit thrives in the Andean people, in their traditions, and in the landscapes they continue to shape. This isn't just about preserving history. It's about living history, carrying forward the lessons of an empire that, for all its flaws, mastered the art of survival in one of the planet's most challenging environments. So, as we wrap up this saga, remember that the story of the Incas isn't just one of gold and glory or conquest and collapse. It's a tale of human innovation, resilience, and the enduring power of culture. In the grand tapestry of history, the Incas wove a pattern that still holds strong, a testament to their lasting impact on the world stage. While the empire may have fallen, its spirit remains as steadfast as the Andes themselves, a reminder that true legacy is not measured by what is lost, but by what endures. You bolt awake to the sound of bustling streets echoing through your modest abode in ancient Athens. No snooze button here, my friend, just the cacophony of life getting down to business outside your window. Welcome to a day in a city where personal space is as foreign a concept as Wi-Fi. First things first, hygiene, or as the Athenians might put it, what's that? Let's talk about water. Sure, Athens had a water system, but don't expect anything that rivals your modern plumbing. Aqueducts, check. Fountains, got 'em. But hot showers, not in this democracy. Public baths were the norm, and if you're imagining a relaxing spa experience, adjust your expectations. These communal baths were more about necessity than luxury, and privacy wasn't exactly on the agenda. Instead, you'd find a buzzing hub of social interaction, where nakedness was as ordinary as discussing the latest political drama. Now, let's debunk a little myth: the Greeks and their supposed obsession with cleanliness. While it's true they bathed more often than some of their contemporaries, deodorant wasn't a thing. Imagine a hot Athenian day, and the aroma of an entire city relying on olive oil and a good scrub to stay fresh. The reality was a lot less fragrant than Hollywood might have you believe. With your hygiene sort of handled, it's time to eat, or not. Breakfast in ancient Athens was a quick affair. If you were lucky, some bread dipped in wine. Not exactly a continental breakfast, but hey, it's enough to fuel the morning hustle. Speaking of which, that hustle isn't just about earning a living. It's about showing up in the public sphere, where your status is measured by how well you can talk politics and philosophy. Forget Instagram. Your influence is determined by your oratory skills and intellectual prowess. Now, onto grooming rituals. Athenians took their public appearances seriously. Men might spend their mornings at the barber, not just for trim, but for the latest gossip. Think of it as the ancient Greek Twitter. Women, meanwhile, had their own beauty regimens, but let's not romanticize it too much. Cosmetics were often lead-based, because nothing says beauty like a touch of poison. These routines were more than personal choices. They were reflections of societal values. In a city-state that prized civic engagement, appearing polished was as much about respectability as it was about vanity. You didn't just represent yourself. You were a walking billboard for your family and your city. As we dissect these morning rituals, it's clear that the Athenians lived in a world of contrasts. They gave us the foundations of Western philosophy and democracy, yet struggled with the basics of hygiene that we take for granted today. They valued public discourse and civic duty, but lived in a society where personal comfort often came second to communal needs. So, as you take on the day in ancient Athens, remember, you're stepping into a world where the line between myth and reality is as blurred as the reflection in a bronze mirror. It's a place where daily life is a delicate dance between personal ambition and public expectation, where every morning routine is a snapshot of a broader cultural narrative. And if you're still longing for that hot shower, well, you might be better off trying to invent a time machine. But enough about morning routines. You've scrubbed off the sleep with a communal splash and a generous serving of gossip. Now, it's time to dive headfirst into the belly of Athens, the Agora. This isn't just any marketplace. It's the beating heart of the city where democracy and commerce collide in a glorious circus of shouting merchants, debating philosophers, and scheming politicians. Welcome to the ancient version of Times Square, minus the neon lights, but with a whole lot more olive oil. The Agora is a sprawling open space where you'll find everything from farmers hawking their fresh figs to craftsmen peddling the latest in bronzeware technology. And let's not forget the philosophers, each trying to outdo the other with their theories on life, the universe, and everything in between. Picture Socrates, perhaps, wandering these very stalls, questioning everything from the price of fish to the meaning of justice. It's a place where economy meets ideology, and you're here to witness it all. Let's tackle the economy first. The currency jingling in your toga pocket. That would be the drachma, a silver coin roughly equivalent to a skilled worker's daily wage. A loaf of bread might cost you about 1/6 of a drachma, so budgeting is key. And if you think haggling at your local flea market is intense, try bartering with a seasoned Athenian fishmonger who's got years of practice under his belt, or more accurately, his chitin. Here, bargaining isn't just a transaction. It's practically an Olympic sport, with verbal jabs and rhetorical flourishes more dazzling than any discus throw. But don't be fooled into thinking the Agora is all about drachmas and dramatic discounts. It's also a political arena. This is where you'll hear the latest decrees announced, and where citizens, armed with opinions sharper than a Spartan spear, gather to discuss everything from military campaigns to the latest plays by Sophocles. The Phoenix, just a stone's throw away, is where the assembly meets, and every citizen is expected to participate. That's right, every citizen, at least the male ones, because this democracy still has its limitations. Women, slaves, and medics, resident foreigners, need not apply, even if they have more sense than half the men there. Despite its imperfections, The Athenian political system was a radical departure from the monarchies and tyrannies that dominated elsewhere. It's a place where your voice could, quite literally, change the world, provided you had the right chromosomes and family tree. And while we're myth-busting, let's clear up one thing. These debates weren't the calm, orderly affairs you might imagine. They were more like a rowdy town hall meeting on steroids, with people shouting across the open air, arguments punctuated by the occasional fruit projectile. As you weave through this sea of humanity, keep an eye out for the Stoa of Atalos, a grand colonnade that offers a little respite from the chaos. It's a place to meet friends, exchange news, or catch a traveling sophist's lecture. But don't get too comfortable. The Agora waits for no one, and there's always another deal to be struck, another debate to be joined. Now, if your head isn't already spinning, think about the sheer diversity of ideas and goods passing through this space. Spices from the East, Egyptian papyrus, Persian rugs. Athens was a hub of international trade long before globalism became a buzzword. The Agora was a marketplace of both goods and ideas, and its influence stretched far beyond the city walls. It was here that the seeds of Western philosophy were sown, and where the concept of civic responsibility took root. At the end of your day in the Agora, you might feel like you've run a marathon, and in a way you have. Navigating this ancient hub is no small feat. It's a test of your wit, stamina, and social skills. But as you leave, remember this. The Agora isn't just a backdrop to Athenian life. It's the stage where history was written, a place where every citizen had a role to play, even if not all roles were created equal. So, as you dust off the Agora's chaos from your sandals, take a moment to appreciate the madness. It's not just a market. It's the embodiment of a civilization that dared to dream of democracy and debate, even if it often stumbled in its execution. And if you think you'd thrive in such a place, just wait until you see what the rest of Athens has in store. And just as you think you're getting a handle on the chaotic beauty that is the Agora, let's pivot to where the real mental gymnastics take place, the philosophical playground of Athens. Welcome to the intellectual boot camp of the ancient world, where wit is your weapon, and Socratic debates are the battleground. This is where the phrase, thinking man's game, comes from, and trust me, you'd better bring your A-game or risk being left in the dust by toga-wearing brainiacs. Now, let's talk education in ancient Athens. If you imagine a structured school system with neat rows of desks and a chalkboard, think again. Athenian education was more of a DIY affair, a patchwork of private tutors and mentoring. Boys started their academic journey around age 7, learning the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. By their teens, they'd be elbow-deep in more advanced subjects like music, poetry, and gymnastics. Yes, you heard that right, gymnastics. Because nothing says well-rounded education like throwing a discus while reciting Homer. But don't be fooled by the pastoral image of eager students under the olive trees. The real education came from the art of rhetoric. If you couldn't argue your point until your opponent conceded, or at least ran out of excuses, you might as well pack up and head back to the farm. The ability to speak persuasively wasn't just a nice skill. It was crucial for participating in the democratic process. In a city where your vote could change history, your tongue was as important as your sword. Enter the philosophical heavyweights, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These guys weren't just sitting around contemplating their navels. They were the rock stars of Athens, minus the groupies, but with just as much drama. Socratic debates were the norm, and if you couldn't hold your ground in a verbal sparring match with Socrates, you'd better prepare for a philosophical beatdown. Ask any of his students. Spoiler alert, most of them ended up questioning their own existence. Speaking of Socrates, let's bust a myth, the idea that he was universally revered. In reality, many Athenians found him about as pleasant as a wasp at a summer picnic. His method of relentless questioning, now known as the Socratic method, stripped away pretenses and exposed ignorance. Not everyone was thrilled about having their intellectual flaws paraded in public, especially when those flaws belonged to the powerful elite. This eventually led to Socrates' trial and execution, proving that even in a democracy, too much truth-telling can be hazardous to your health. Moving on to Plato, Socrates' most famous student, whose academy was the ancient world's version of Ivy League. If you think getting admitted into Harvard is tough, try impressing Plato. He was interested in cultivating philosopher kings, not just churning out diploma holders. Plato's dialogues tackled everything from justice to metaphysics, and if you couldn't keep up with the Platonic ideals, you'd find yourself philosophically sidelined. But wait, there's more. Aristotle, Plato's star pupil, decided to take philosophy and run with it, straight into the realm of empirical observation. If Plato was all about the forms, Aristotle was about the facts. He wrote treatises on everything from politics to biology, and his work laid the groundwork for centuries of scientific inquiry. Still, you'd probably fail miserably at impressing him, too. His lectures at the Lyceum weren't for the faint-hearted. They were intellectual marathons requiring stamina and a tolerance for Greek wine. Now, let's talk leisure, Athenian elite style. While you might unwind with yoga or a Netflix binge, the upper crust of Athens had more, shall we say, robust recreational pursuits. Picture this, wrestling in the nude. Yes, you read that right. Wrestling wasn't just a sport. It was a philosophical statement, an ode to the beauty and strength of the human body. The gymnasium was a place where physical and intellectual exercises went hand in hand, literally. The elite would train their bodies in the morning and their minds in the afternoon, engaging in discussions that ranged from ethics to politics, all while wearing nothing more than a layer of olive oil. How's that for multitasking? These activities weren't just about leisure. They were about status and cultural values. Being physically fit was seen as a reflection of moral and intellectual strength. The Greeks loved nothing more than a good contest, whether it was in the gymnasium or the symposium. Speaking of which, the symposium was the ultimate boys' night out, minus the board games, but with plenty of wine and philosophical banter. Here, the elites would recline on couches, drink copious amounts of diluted wine, and engage in debates that would make your average book club look like a kindergarten circle time. But let's not romanticize these gatherings too much. They were exclusive affairs, strictly for the male elite. Women, if present at all, were there as entertainers, not participants, and the discussions, while intellectually stimulating, were often punctuated by the kind of debauchery that would make a Roman orgy blush. So, while the symposium might sound like a cerebral paradise, it was also a hotbed of power plays and social maneuvering. All this paints a picture of an Athens that's both mesmerizing and maddening, a city of contradictions, where the quest for knowledge coexisted with societal inequities, and where the pursuit of beauty and truth was as likely to lead to a symposium as it was to a philosophical enlightenment. As you navigate the streets of ancient Athens, remember, this is a city where the line between leisure and learning was as thin as the edge of a philosopher's razor. And if you think you've got it all figured out, just wait until you step into the next chapter of this historical maze. So, as you ponder the complexities of Athenian life, don't just marvel at the legends. Dig into the realities that shape them. Because in this city of gods and men, the truth is as elusive as a whisper in the wind, and understanding it requires more than just a passing acquaintance with Plato or a quick jog through the gymnasium. It demands a deep dive into the cultural currents that made Athens both a beacon of civilization and a cauldron of contradictions. And if you're still standing at the end of it all, well, maybe you were an Athenian in a past life. But don't get too cocky. There's still more of this ancient world to explore. And speaking of ancient worlds, let's dive into the one place that might make you reconsider your culinary fantasies about Greece, the Athenian dining scene. If you've been dreaming of luscious Greek salads and sizzling souvlaki, prepare to lower your expectations to something more akin to a bread and porridge diet. Welcome to the reality, where the average Athenian palate was less Mediterranean feast and more minimalist chic. In ancient Athens, a typical diet was fueled by barley, the unsung hero of the cereal world. Bread made from barley flour was a staple, and if you were feeling fancy, you might have some olive oil to dip it in. Meat was a rare treat, usually reserved for religious festivals or the wealthy elite. So if you're picturing yourself tucking into a juicy steak, think again. For most Athenians, protein came in the form of legumes, or if they were lucky, the occasional fish. Now, let's talk about the Athenian meal structure. Breakfast, as previously mentioned, was more of an afterthought, a quick bite to tide you over until the main event, dinner. That's right, lunch was often skipped entirely, because why bother when you can just hold out until the evening meal? Dinner was the social highlight of the day, but before you imagine a lavish banquet, remember, this is ancient Athens, not an episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Meals were communal affairs, emphasizing the social over the culinary. Families would gather, often with friends or neighbors, to share whatever modest spread they could muster. The real showstopper was the symposium, a kind of dinner party for the elite. Picture a room filled with reclining men, sipping wine and engaging in philosophical banter that could easily devolve into drunken antics if one wasn't careful. Ah, wine, the nectar of the gods and the Athenians' drink of choice. But here's the twist. It was more water than wine. The Greeks diluted their wine with water, a ratio of 3 parts water to 1 part wine being the norm. Why? Because getting drunk was seen as a major faux pas. In a society that prized self-control and rational discourse, losing your wits was akin to social suicide. The symposium was as much about showcasing your conversational skills as it was about enjoying the fermented grape. Speaking of symposiums, let's pop the bubble on their perceived glamour. While these gatherings are often romanticized as highbrow intellectual salons, they were also exclusive and gender-biased. Women, if present, were generally in the roles of entertainers or servants. So, while these events might sound like a paradise for the philosophically inclined, they were also bastions of male privilege and social maneuvering. But hey, let's not completely write off the Athenian dining experience. Despite its sparse menu, it was rich in cultural significance. Meals were opportunities for bonding, storytelling, and philosophical debates. And let's not forget the role of food in religious practices. Offerings to the gods, often in the form of food, were a significant part of Athenian life, underscoring the connection between sustenance and spirituality. Now, while we're on the subject of food and religion, let's debunk another myth. The notion that ancient Athenians lived in a constant state of gastronomic abundance. Reality check. Most Athenians lived on the edge of subsistence. Agriculture was dependent on the whims of nature, and a bad harvest could mean the difference between feast and famine. So, while the idea of a perpetual Greek feast is charming, the truth is far grittier. Food security was a real concern, and the average citizen often faced the harsh realities of scarcity. Despite these challenges, the Athenians made do with what they had. Their diet may have been humble, but it was also surprisingly healthy, relying heavily on grains, vegetables, and legumes. And while the lack of meat might seem a downside, it meant that many Athenians were inadvertently ahead of their time in terms of a plant-based diet. So, if you ever find yourself transported back to ancient Athens, at least you can console yourself with the knowledge that your cholesterol levels will be in check. As the sun sets on your Athenian day, it's clear that dining in this ancient city is more than just a meal. It's a window into a society that valued community, conversation, and control over indulgence. Sure, you might long for a cheeseburger and a cold beer, but in Athens, the simple act of breaking bread was a testament to the interconnectedness of daily life, philosophy, the divine. So, as you recline on your couch with a glass of diluted wine, raise a toast to the Athenians, a people who, despite their limited culinary repertoire, managed to create a culture that savored every morsel of conversation, every drop of diluted wine, and every moment of shared humanity. In the grand tapestry of history, these meals were more than sustenance. They were the threads that wove together the social fabric of a civilization that dared to dream, debate, and dine together. Ready for the next course? Stay tuned, because we've barely scratched the surface of Athenian life. There's still much to explore in this city where the line between myth and reality is as elusive as a perfectly ripe olive. And who knows? By the time we're done, you might just find yourself craving more than just a taste of ancient Athens. As you finish your diluted wine, you might think the day's winding down, but hold your horses, or should I say, your chariots. The night is young, and Athens has one more spectacle to offer, the theater. Yep, this is where you'll find the ancient equivalent of a Netflix binge, minus the cozy couch and microwave popcorn. Instead, brace yourself for wooden benches and a chorus that could rival any reality show judge panel. Theater in Athens wasn't just an evening distraction. It was a civic duty, a cultural pilgrimage, and a social commentary wrapped in a dramatic toga. Our first stop, the Theatre of Dionysus. Nestled on the slopes of the Acropolis, this open-air venue could seat up to 17,000 spectators, all eager to soak up the latest in Athenian drama. Forget your cushioned seats. Expect to park yourself on stone benches, shoulder to shoulder with fellow citizens. Now, let's dive into the main course, the plays themselves. Athenian drama was a heady mix of tragedy and comedy, with tragedy often stealing the limelight. Why? Because nothing says entertainment like existential despair and a chorus lamenting the fickle nature of fate. These tragedies were the blockbuster hits of their day, drawing in crowds with tales of hubris, heroism, and heartache. Think Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, where the ultimate plot twist isn't a cliffhanger, but a revelation that leaves the protagonist blind and exiled. Spoiler alert, it's a real tearjerker. But contrary to popular belief, these plays weren't just about the heavy stuff. Comedy had its place too, thanks to playwrights like Aristophanes, who knew how to tickle the Athenian funny bone with sharp satire and bawdy humor. His play Lysistrata is a prime example, where women band together to end a war by, well, holding back certain marital privileges. Talk about a plot with a punchline. Now, before you get carried away by the glamour of Athenian theatre, let's bust a myth. This wasn't an art for art's sake affair. The theatre functioned as a mirror to society, reflecting its virtues, vices, and everything in between. It was a space where political and social issues could be explored, challenged, and debated in a way that the Agora couldn't quite match. The plays served as both entertainment and education, offering commentary on everything from the pitfalls of power to the complexities of human nature. And let's not forget the economic side of things. Tickets weren't free, but they were subsidized by the state through the Theoric Fund, ensuring that even the less affluent citizens could partake in this cultural feast. It was a democratic gesture, reinforcing the idea that theatre was a communal experience meant to engage all layers of society. So, while you might think of it as a night out, it was also an exercise in civic participation. As the final act unfolds and the chorus delivers its poignant closing lines, take a moment to ponder the legacy of Athenian theatre. Its influence stretches far beyond the marble steps of the theatre of Dionysus, shaping Western literature, drama, and even modern cinema. The themes explored in these ancient plays, power, morality, and the human condition, are as relevant today as they were over 2 millennia ago. It's a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and its ability to bridge the gap between past and present. But why, you might ask, does this matter? Because Athens wasn't just a city. It was a crucible of ideas, a place where art and politics intersected in ways that still resonate. The theatre was more than a stage. It was a platform for dialogue, dissent, and discovery. It was where Athenians came to grapple with the complexities of their world, to question their leaders, and to reflect on their own humanity. And as the curtain falls on this day in ancient Athens, it's clear that living here isn't for the faint-hearted. It's a city of contrasts, where the pursuit of beauty and truth coexists with harsh realities and societal inequities. It's a place where the line between myth and reality is as blurred as the smoke from a sacrificial altar, and where every experience is a lesson in the art of living. So, as you navigate the bustling streets back to your modest abode, remember that you've just been part of a civilization that dared to dream big, to question deeply, and to express boldly. Athens is a city that celebrated the human spirit in all its flawed glory, a place where the past continues to speak to us, not with the voice of marble statues, but with the echoes of its vibrant, chaotic, and captivating life. In the end, you might find yourself longing for the comforts of the modern world, your plush mattress, your reliable plumbing, your instant access to global cuisines. But perhaps, just perhaps, there's a part of you that envies the Athenians, their passion for debate, their dedication to the public sphere, and their relentless quest for understanding in a world as complex as it is compelling. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the echoes of ancient Athens lull you with their timeless tales, knowing that you've glimpsed the heart of a city that, despite its imperfections, laid the groundwork for so much of what we hold dear today. And who knows, maybe tomorrow you'll wake up with a newfound appreciation for your heart shower, and for the enduring legacy of a civilization that dared to ask, what if?